Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku Reborn is Heavenly Dragon and had Harem? This story is Death Isn't the End for Izuku by Anthony Tyler 9. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button, as your one like motivates me to bring more stories, and subscribe the channel if you are new so you won't miss our latest videos. Izuku wakes up from his sleep as he remembers how he died on Earth from the DxD universe. He remembers how he was reborn into it as a dragon as he looks around his surroundings to see if there is anything that he can make of it in order to find what he is looking for. Looking out the glass, he finds a doctor hard at work on a project that has his name on it. From what it looks like, Izuku's memories are serving him right, and he doesn't like the manic laughter that is coming out muffled. To think that we could finally find a quirkless individual after so long. I was so happy to find out he killed himself from jumping from a rooftop. The doctor laughs. Izuku realizes that the voice of the man who was talking about him is extremely familiar as he gets a closer look at the man using his draconic memory banks as well as eyes. He thinks that his body is still that of his body when he died protecting the universe from the Chaos Brigade, but when he can't get a closer look at the man, he sighs mentally. Noticing some brain fluctuations coming from Izuku's tank, the doctor makes Izuku's suspicious mind its prey as he gives Izuku what he wanted. Turning to look at the pod he was inside, he gives Izuku front full center view of what he looks like, and Izuku is suddenly wishing that he wasn't in this world anymore. It's Drive Kyudai Garaki, and he looks to be using Izuku's dying body as one of his experiments to create more Nomu. Using his quirkless genetics as a base in order to place more quirks inside of himself, Izuku takes notice that One for All isn't there anymore as he tried to activate his old quirk. But it was useless as he started to look around the place. "Ah, it seems like you have woken up my old patient. I have been putting you back together again, and it has been a lot of fun. I am currently placing the last 2 quirks needed in order to put those bastard heroes in their place as footholds for Sensei to take over the world," Kyudai said, laughing. A smaller Nomu was seen delivering an item to the doctor, and it had Izuku's interest as it was duck-like in nature, but it was deformed as well as ugly to look at, but had the telltale nature that it was a Nomu based on his brain sticking out of his head. "Come on, little Johnny, we need to tell Sensei that the boy is awake and needs to be trained once he has all of the quirks needed for his project," Kyudai said, using the little Nomu as a teleportation device. With Kyudai Garaki gone, Izuku looks around at the other test tubes and finds the high-end Nomus that he had feared back in his old world where he fought them himself. These ones were definitely in the earliest stages of development as they were gestating in their test tubes as Izuku stared at each one of them. Looking at the glass, Izuku moves his left hand in order to push against the glass, and when he sees it, he is horrified at the fact that his hybrid form is still up from his battle on Earth from Issei's world dimension. Pulling it back in and revealing a curly tuft of black hair with green highlights, as well as emerald eyes that were big and expressive. Izuku takes a better look at his surroundings when a massive spout of black goo appears in the vicinity of his test tube as Kyudai and Johnny appear again, but this time with the man who had given him a lot of scares in his old world. All for one. The man was incredibly injured at the moment as he was wearing his headpiece that gave him oxygen as well as kept up his intimidation factor towards others. "Ah, so this is the young boy you found on the ground dying of blood loss as well as pain and suffering," the man said, as he stared at the test tube. All for one place his hand on the testing tube as Izuku's hand is immediately pulled away from it as All for One chuckled. "He already knows to fear me. Good, that will be great to deal with in the future," All for One said, as he walked around the shop. Staring at the villain, Izuku decided that enough was enough, and he talked to the villain mentally with a little trick he had learned from Issei's world. Telepathy. "I don't know why I am here, but you are making a grave mistake using me as one of your pawns." All for One, Izuku said, as his voice sounded like a dragon's. All for One asked, as he looked back at Izuku. "You are going to make the biggest mistake in keeping me alive." All for One, Izuku stated once more, "You will not remember this conversation as well as what happened to you once this is over, boy. You will not treat me like I am messing with God. I am the god around here," All for One said, as Izuku in his testing chamber chuckled within the healing water. "It was just a mere warning. Those who seek power will ultimately gain it, only to lose it at the worst of times," Izuku said, before falling asleep. "Kyudai, what the hell happened to that boy? Wasn't he a coward, as well as bullied? All for One asked, concerned. I couldn't know. I never knew that he had the courage to talk to you like that. Kyudai said, perplexed at the situation. Is this one of your projects to making a high-end Nomu? All for One asked. No, this was Project Hero Illusion. He shouldn't be capable of talking at all. Kyudai said, as he looked over his notes. Keep a close eye on this Nomu. I have a feeling that he will rebel against us at every turn we make. All for One said, disappearing in a puddle of goop. A few months pass as Izuku is still gestating in the tube. Kyudai has been making his torment a lot worse as he was beginning to lose his mind to the experimentation. But just as he was about to lose all hope, the torment stops as his quirks activate, allowing him to utilize this as his best chance to escape from All for One's range as well as power of influence. Breaking free from the tube on the one day Kyudai is not present in the hospital, because he said that even villains need days off. Izuku broke free from one of the healing tubes that housed him and crawled on the ground for a few minutes. Cough, cough, cough. Damn it. That hurt a lot. Izuku coughed as he gained some oxygen back to his lungs. Getting up from the ground, Izuku stumbled around the underground base as he made his way for the elevator in order to get above ground. Entering the elevator, he entered a code in that allowed him to go up to the top floor where all the hustling and bustling was happening inside the hospital. Exiting the elevator, Izuku stumbled about the area, telling doctors alike that he was just leaving and just a little tired. Once he made it outside, however, he looked around and found himself back within the heroic society that had killed him in the past. To think that after I died, I would be brought back here. But from what I can remember, Kyudai was killed as well as never able to be placed in prison since he was killed by quirk suppressant cuffs. Which means this is a past version of my world or a completely different one. Izuku said, as he mumbled his thoughts out loud. As soon as Izuku gets to an abandoned area, he finds a warehouse that he could hide within as he found some boxes to take his anger out on. Why can't I just die? What do I have to do just to stay dead? I have no home. Punch. I have no family. Punch. I have no way to make a new home. Slam. Why can't I just die in peace and quiet and just move on to the next life? Izuku screams at the top of his lungs as he punches through the warehouse wall. Izuku is huffing and puffing as he regains some stamina as well as endurance from his spout of anger and fury. All he just wanted to do was die, and live on in the next life, but no. The world just has to bend him over its knee and just fuck him 3 ways till Sunday until he can finally die. As Izuku sits down in a corner of the building, a man enters the warehouse wearing some capture gear as well as yellow goggles on his face. But that was a hallucination. Izuku knew it as his view changed to be revealing a younger Shigaraki Tamura as he took notice of Izuku. So this is where you went. I thought that you had escaped from Kyudai's little experiment chamber. Come on. Sensei wishes to speak to you, Shigaraki said, as he led Izuku towards a warp gate. Izuku got up from his position on the floor as he walked through the warp gate as he reappeared in front of All for One himself. Did you really think that you could escape me and my forces? I have people all over the place as well as eyes and ears as far as the eyes can see. Don't think you can escape my presence, Nomu. All for One said, growling. I am not your puppet. All for One. I am my own person. I don't know how you managed to find my body, but that doesn't mean you will defeat my spirit. Izuku said, as he growled back at the menacing villain. Never before had I have had a Nomu that directly disregarded my demands as well as wishes. Your spirit will taste delectable when I am able to finally place it under the firm command of my control. All for One said, as he placed Izuku under a coma stasis, all the while tormenting his mind with the death of his family and allies he made in his old world. About another full year passes by and Izuku is seen sleeping on an operating table as he is having nightmare after nightmare to the point all the death and destruction that he sees within his mind has made him numb to the pain. Looking over the vastness of the plains on Earth's city of Kuo, Izuku sees all the dead bodies of his friends as well as his wife Seraphal and his children. As tears are coming from his eyes, Izuku stares with a blank look on his face, as if he is waiting for the dream to restart from the beginning. The tears show him that he still feels horrible to watch their demise over and over again, but he holds in all the emotions of how it really feels deep within his heart. The dragon part of his soul encompasses him with affection as well as the memories of the life he had before they died. And Izuku's mind is brought to the very safety of his heart where he holds his most precious dreams of kindness as well as family hidden from all for one. During this whole year of pain and suffering, Izuku has heard all the commotion that has happened over that entire time frame. From all for one checking in on his subordinates who are keeping a very close eye on UA Academy as well as Class 1A to whoever the new successor of All Might's quirk is. He then gets an idea of how to just end all of heroism at its core. He looks over at Izuku's comatose body and tells his doctor something that is out of his hearing range. All Izuku can hear from outside his comatose body is the laughter of Kyudai and everything goes to black once more. A week after that event, Izuku wakes up in the middle of a torn-up town as he looks around after getting up from the ground. Cough, cough. What the hell? Izuku asked, as he slowly got up from the ground. Looking in his area, he soon found that some students were in his area, and moved to ask them where he was. As soon as he appeared in front of some of the girls that he was approaching, he noticed that something within him was urging him to reproduce with them. That isn't good. What the hell is wrong with my body? Izuku thought to himself as the girls finally took notice of him. What the hell is that? One of the girls called out scared. She was short with purple hair in a bob cut, as well as had a trademark look of having earphone jacks hanging from her ears. She had black eyes as she stared at him with pinprick pupils. What is going on? Izuku mumbled out, as a pink mist came out of him. Kyoka Jiro had been having a good day. She had been told by her class that they would be going on a trip to the USJ in order to learn how to become experts on rescue. She never wished for it to turn out like this. A day that was meant to learn how to rescue civilians as well as teach them how to be true heroes, had turned into a nightmare of the worst variety. And now she was standing in front of an 8-foot-tall man who was as muscular as All Might, and his raging boner was about 1.5 feet long. She couldn't understand how someone like him could exist with that kind of package underneath his pants. But she never prepared for it to be completely meek as well as confused as to where he was. It was also black in color with green scales on its body. What is going on? The monster asked, confused and concerned. What the hell? It can talk. Toru screeched as the monster honed in on her position. Who said that? Where are you? The monster said, in its meek voice. It can see me. Toru cried out in fear. So the direction I am looking at is where you are. But that means that you're invisible, except for your gloves and boots. Why, you'll need a suit that is made from your DNA. The monster mumbled out, as Jiro caught onto its rambling words. Aren't you supposed to kill us? Mina asked, as she moved closer to the monster. Don't get near, the monster said, releasing some pink gas. Mina, get back from it. We don't know if it's able to kill us. Jiro screamed at her friend. Mina jumped back as soon as that was heard as the monster was able to finally relax just a little bit, before Ochako moved closer to the monster. Ochako, what are you doing? Momo called out, as Ochako stayed on her seemingly mission to move closer to the monster. What happened to you? You shouldn't have these scars on your body from having a quirk. Ochako asked, as she looked into the beast's eyes. Bad people. S. Shigaraki Tamura, L. League of V Villains. Found my body. And modified it to their needs. The monster said, as Jiro immediately caught onto the word body. How did they find your body? Jiro asked, concerned. Apparently. I killed myself in this world. I was bullied to the point of suicide. The monster said, as Jiro could only think of one case that was never fixed for the family involved. That's horrible. Who would ever bully another? What was the bullying for anyway? Ochako ranted when the beast in front of them growled softly. I was Q quirkless. And nobody cares for the Q quirkless, and I was an easy target, but my mind and soul isn't from this world. I came from another. Ochako Uraraka, the monster said, as it looked at them all with a hidden feeling of caution as well as fear. Was your name? Midoriya Izuku? Jiro asked, concerned. The beast looked at her spot and she was rooted to it as the beast lowered its head towards her as he moved closer to her. As soon as his head was in front of her face, she could smell the aphrodisiacs coming from his body, and it wasn't a good smelling one either. My name is Midoriya Izuku, and I was the successor of All Might from the world I came from. I died because my allies had thought that I would turn on them, and I went out in a blaze of glory, killing myself and Shigaraki in order to flee from that world. Only to find myself in another, and killed myself there out of sadness, anger, loneliness, but most of all fury. There was a saying in that world: you should never mess with a dragon, or its horde. The monster now identified as Midoriya Izuku said. Why is that? Ochako asked, having moved near Jiro. Because it will anger the dragon to the point of wishing for revenge. I got mine when I killed everything that harmed my life as well as family. The people that killed my wife, my daughters. My youngest was in a park with me as she died before my very eyes. What do you think would happen if a dragon's family are killed before him? Izuku asked, as he stared into both girls' eyes, his slitted eyes making them rub their legs in anticipation as well as a need that was rooting itself deep within both girls unknowingly. What did you do in order to get your revenge? Ochako asked the question for every girl present as most of them had gotten closer to him. I destroyed the very planet I was on and everyone that was held dear to the Chaos Brigade. They brought me into a war that I wanted no part of, and they wished to kill all those who were part of the supernatural. Unfortunately, my wife as well as children counted as part of it. Izuku said, as a stray tear came out of his eye. Destroy the very planet you were on. How much power did you have? Momo asked, as she was now very concerned about the creature in front of them. I was the heavenly dragon of kindness and compassion from that specific world. And my power as a heavenly dragon placed me at the top of the pecking order. Just under the god of destruction Shiva, and the dragon's god Great Red and Ophis. My power alone could cause the world catastrophes that wouldn't end here, and end with the planet being incapable of life being supported by it. Izuku finished as he placed himself on the ground in order to release all the aphrodisiacs. What are you about to do? Suyu asked, concerned. You all might want to move away from my position. I am about to release all the aphrodisiacs that are within my modified body. If you all are hit with it, you all might get killed from the sheer amount of it, or if you manage to survive, you would be very hot and bothered. Izuku said, before slowly releasing the gas from every pore on his body. With that, the girls had moved away from Izuku's position and watched as a massive cloud of aphrodisiacs had been pulled out of Izuku's form as it coalesced in the sky blocking out the sun. Once the aphrodisiacs were outed from his system, Izuku stood up from the ground as his height had significantly lowered to where he was barely taller than Ochako. And his newer form was a scrawny teenage boy with black hair with green highlights, his eyes emerald-slitted eyes that looked at them with a very cautious look. Now all of you need to know that there is another version of me, but purely made of muscle and looks like a bird. It was made to kill All Might, Izuku said, as he passed out from the overuse of the aphrodisiacs. Izuku was running around the USJ with the girls from his past, that he specifically remembers not wishing to kill him, but at the same time going through with it since they couldn't let him survive based on chance. He was still having the urge to fornicate with the girls but was holding himself off until then in order to keep the girls' chastities. They soon arrive at the location where they find the teacher of the class Shota Aizawa being pummeled into the ground by the Nomu. Izuku immediately charged towards the Nomu as his teeth bared out against his brother in arms, based on genetics. The leader of the villainous charge against the heroes had noticed his arrival and sneered at him as they growled angrily. Kurogiri, kill that Nomu, it won't listen to reason. The man-child cried out, as Izuku watched as Kurogiri had looked in his direction. Izuku then stood up to full height as he increased his power output in order to make himself more intimidating towards the villain. Do you really think that you can easily defeat me, Kurogiri? I am the heavenly dragon of kindness and compassion. I will not be killed by someone so weak. Izuku roared out as he clashed with both the enemy Nomu and Kurogiri, allowing the girls time to get their sensei out of the fight. Holding off two Nomus whilst having his own power just flowing through his veins in order to burst out was incredibly difficult. As Izuku transformed into his draconic human form, he stared through the smoke and debris as he sneered at his enemies. Both opponents were staring at his form in awe as he had green scales all over his skin and face, not covering the entirety of his face, but enough to make him look extremely dangerous. All Might was sitting in the office of the principal as he was conversing with Nezu about what happened that morning. They had been talking about how he really needs to make sure that he takes his time seriously since he doesn't have enough time to find a successor. If he could find one, then that would mean he needed to spend all his time in training them to be capable of defeating all for one, since there wasn't a body found. He had been searching for the body for the last 5 years and hadn't been able to find it, and decided that since it's been 5 years since he defeated the villain, that said villain was finally dead. He was about to talk about his day when the door to his office was opened as Iida was seen entering the room with sweat coming down in treasure troves of large quantities as she stared at them with fear on her face. Villains, have attacked. Everyone has been spread inside, Iida said, as she collapsed onto the ground. Good job, Iida-san, I will make sure everyone is safe and sound. All Might called out, as he left the room. Go ahead of us, All Might. We will catch up. Nezu called out on the PA system as All Might ran through the school in order to get to the USJ. All Might was on his way, and Izuku was fighting both Nomu typings as they were slowly becoming too much to fight all alone. He had actually knocked out Kurogiri as the Mist Man was easier to knock out since all he needed to do was hit the metal collar hard enough to take all his breath away. Now it was just him and the Nomu maid to kill the man who he idolized as a child, and the thing was giving him a run for his money. If Izuku's body was that of his own before he was brought over to his new dimension, he wouldn't be having any issues with the Nomu at the moment. But that didn't matter. He really needed to end this fight before the villainous leader would be coming in to assist the Nomu. As he stood back away from the Nomu, it stood in front of him with its head held high as it stared him down. Izuku took as much breath in his mouth as his chest cavity increased in size to make sure that there was enough space for the added air. A massive ball of energy was being formed there as he stood on his hind legs looking down at the Nomu. The other students who've arrived in the plaza to take on the Nomu themselves watched as the draconic Nomu was facing off against both the Nomu creature and Kurogiri, and watched as he defeated the mist villain with seeming ease. But now all Izuku's attention was on the Nomu in front of himself as the man-child villain leader was screaming about their escape bridge being out of the game. Izuku focused all his power on the Nomu in front of himself, the ball of energy becoming larger inside his mouth as he focused all his power on the collection of energy. The Nomu stood still as it awaited another order to fight Izuku as Izuku's breath attack was nearing its end mark of collection of energy. Once the amount of energy was collected, he stared down the Nomu with his mouth above the Nomu and released his attack on the Nomu itself. Right as the attack landed on the Nomu, All Might had broken through the building of the USJ as he stared at the scene before himself. All of his students were standing near the draconic villain as it seemingly disposed of a student of his since he didn't think it was the Nomu was brought here. Rushing towards the draconic villain, he slammed his fist into the creature, causing it to stop its attack prematurely and fall onto its back. All Might climbed on top of it as he stared into the emerald green eyes as it stared back with slitted ones. All Might noticed a faint speckle of freckles on the maw of the draconic villain as he stared in shock. This was young Midoriya. What happened to him? He turns to where the villain was attacking and found a bunch of mush on the ground that was black as well as charred. Looking around the place, he found his students looking at him like he was crazy since he attacked the villain with a scowl. Before I continue my attack, what happened here? All Might asked the draconic villain. I am merely defending the students here. All Might, the draconic villain said, staring into the navy blue glowing eyes of All Might. Who did you just decommission? All Might asked, as the mass behind him regenerated. You just prevented me from destroying the Nomu made to kill you. The dragon said, as it passed out from the damage. All Might turned around at this as he saw the Nomu regenerated and standing tall against All Might as they then entered battle. Everything after this was a blur to the draconic boy, as he was slowly coming at the end of the fight since the Nomu was blasted out of the USJ and the villains were staring at the number one hero with fear and trepidation. What? Do you not want to finish the game? I can assure you that it will be your last day if you continue. All Might taunted, as the blue-haired man-child screamed in anger. Izuku moved himself to stand behind All Might as the man-child had gained a smirk as he looked at Izuku. Nomu kill the symbol of peace. The man-child screamed, as Izuku stared at both people. All Might looked behind himself as he kept his stance against the villain's stern as well as still. Steam was coming across himself as he was slowly powering down. As the villain man-child was screaming in laughter about how the symbol of peace was going to die, Izuku stared at the number one with a mirth in his eyes as he looked over at the villainous duo and slammed his fist onto the both of them. Kurogiri was awoken from the slamming sound as he moved to find his charge and certainly found them near death, teleporting them away. "We will return All Might. We give our word," Kurogiri said, as they disappeared into the void. As soon as they left the place, All Might watched as the dragon transformation ended, revealing a boy who had a lot of muscle in the right areas, and having some scales that were emerald in color around his body. Pink smoke was pouring from him in waves, and the number one hero could notice the pink hue to the boy's face as he was panting heavily. "Are you all right, my boy?" All Might asked, concerned. "Where can I go in order to release all the toxic fumes of aphrodisiacs?" Izuku asked, as All Might stared in the boy's face and saw the perpetual blush on his face. "Well, you can stay near me, and I will talk to Midnight in order to knock you out with enough gas from her quirk and your body can release it elsewhere," All Might said, as a wall appeared between the duo and the rest of the class. Receiving a nod from the boy, All Might focused on Smintos as the man had arrived with the rest of the UA staff as he came up. "It seems like even the number one hero can be stopped briefly," the block of a man said, before looking at Izuku. "Didn't you die a few months ago?" he asked, concernedly. "Not sure, all I remember is dying in the world I was in, and appearing in that tank filled with fluid entering my lungs," Izuku said, before collapsing on the ground in pain. Smintos, seeing the problem at hand, placed a hand on the boy's back as he rubbed it. "We need to get you to Recovery Girl, she can help you with any pain," the man said, before All Might place a hand on his shoulder. "Get Midnight over here, he has too many aphrodisiacs in his system to be around women at this point in time, and he needs to be knocked out," the hero said, as Smintos flagged the woman down. As soon as the women made it to their area, she found Izuku sitting on the ground panting heavily as she understood the situation from the gas coming from his body and released her quirk on him. As soon as his vision was blacking out, he gave the woman a smile before falling to the ground, hitting his face on the ground first before anyone could stop him in time. "Damn it, now how are we going to explain the split lip and broken nose?" Midnight said, as he passed out into dreamland. "Can I be a hero too?" a young Izuku asked his mother. Inko looked at her son as she felt tears coming up from her eyes as she moved as fast as she could to be near her crying son as she hugged him close. "I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry," Inko cried out as she held her son close. "No, Mom, that wasn't what I wanted you to say. I wanted you to tell me that I could become a hero," a slightly older Izuku said, as he cried. Izuku found himself further on in his life from the new world he was in. He was standing on top of a building as he found the symbol of peace standing before him in his emaciated form. Can one become a hero like All Might without a quirk? No, I should think not. I hate to be the one to tell you this, kid, it really tears my soul apart since I was in your position at one point in life. But I personally think that you should think realistically, and find a different way to be a hero, such as the police, doctor, and others. Please just don't set out to become a hero since you saw me doing it. The job is only for the faint of heart, and it will test both your patience and your mind. It's fine to dream, just make sure it's realistic," All Might said, as Izuku stared over the edge of the building. "Hey, there might be a way for you to become a hero. Just pray you get a quirk in your next life and jump off the roof. Maybe then you might get a quirk." Katsuki's voice rang in his mind. As Izuku's form moved closer to the edge of the building, we find another Izuku standing near him from behind. "What are you doing? Are you going to give up on your dreams? That isn't how you should do this," the new Izuku said, as the old one looked back. "I can't become a hero like All Might. What's the point of living if I can't even become a hero?" Izuku, New Universe, said. "Just because the number one hero told you that you can't become a hero, doesn't mean you can't be your own hero. Jumping off the roof isn't the answer," old Izuku said, as he held his other self's arm. His eyes were showing warmth that the new one couldn't explain, and he couldn't help but start crying with a smile on his face. "Why is it an alternate version of me who is trying to stop me from committing suicide? Why can't I just die?" the new Izuku said, as he moved closer to the edge. "Death isn't the end. Not for someone like us. We would be sent to another universe or another world that will just create problems for us later on. We need to stick to life and not give up. You can't give up just like that. We kept ourselves from doing that for years. Why are you giving up now?" Izuku asked his former self. Because nobody would care if I died. Not one person would. Izuku knew, said, as Izuku old looked at him concerned. What happened to this version of me? Izuku old asked. My parents abandoned me at an orphanage since they couldn't take care of me. I was then found out to be quirkless, and nobody wants to befriend the quirkless freak. I can't even live in peace without bullies and my peers telling me to just go off and die. Izuku knew, said, as Izuku old stared at him. Will you combine your body with mine? Izuku old asked. What do you mean? Izuku knew asked. I will take over your body, you will be able to rest and live in peace as I take over your new life. I will put you back together. Izuku old said, as Izuku knew saw a flash of white, and Izuku old transformed into a dragon. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Izuku Midoriya, son of Blaze Meteor Dragon King Tannen. And I am the heavenly dragon of kindness and compassion. Allow me to send your soul into heaven so that you can stay within a peaceful death. Izuku old said, as Izuku knew looked relieved. Sure, I can finally have peace and quiet. I can finally have a dream without being in pain. Izuku knew said, as the white light from Izuku old sent the boy's soul to the afterlife. Izuku woke up within Recovery Girl's office as he looked around. He saw that there were multiple people in the room, and they were looking at him like he was already dead. What the hell? One of the people asked, as they looked at his heart monitor. What is going on? Izuku asked, as he looked at the people in the room. Young man, can you tell us your name and how old you are? Recovery Girl asked. My name is Izuku Midoriya, and I am 14 years old. Izuku said, as he looked at the calendar. Correction, I am 15, Izuku said, as everyone in the room looked at him in shock. Hello there, my name is Naomasa Tsukauchi, and I am basically a human lie detector. Can you tell me how you came into the hands of the villains at the USJ? The detective asked, as Izuku looked at the man. Hello Tsukauchi. All I can remember is dying from jumping off a roof about 10 months ago. I just woke up about a week prior before being put under stasis and appearing in the USJ. Izuku said, as the detective looked pensive. Okay, the dying from jumping is both right and wrong, how is that possible? Naomasa asked. I'm not the Izuku from this world. Izuku said, as he looked at the detective as well as Recovery Girl. How are you not the Izuku of this world? Recovery Girl asked. Because, in the world where I came from originally. I was fighting a villain named Tamura Shigaraki, who held the quirk All for One. And my allies after I had defeated Shigaraki, decided to kill both of us in order to keep us from becoming threats further down the line. Izuku said, as Recovery Girl looked at Tsukauchi as the man nodded with a horrified look. Who were the people who betrayed you from your world? Tsukauchi asked. Students from this very school. That includes the teachers, Izuku said, staring the detective in the eye. Okay, we will need to talk about this situation with All Might and the others. Will you stay here? Recovery Girl asked, as Izuku looked at her. Sure, not like I got anything better to do. Just got to cope with the fact that my family is gone as well as the fact that the world I just killed myself from had been targeted and killed by a rogue faction. Izuku said, as he looked at his hands. Leaving Izuku to his own devices, the two adults moved through the halls on a mission. They needed to inform the other teachers as well as principal about the delicate situation they find themselves in now. A few minutes later, the duo find themselves within the teachers' meeting room and are talking to the teachers about the presence of Kurogiri and Shigaraki Tamura being villains. They talked about their plans on how to capture them as well as place them in prison for attacking their students on a field trip. It was here that some of the other teachers talk about the quite large and green elephant in the room. I think it's time we talk about the green-haired boy sitting in the nurse's office. Midnight said, as she looked at her fellow teachers. What about him? He was with the villains, and he should be placed under arrest. Vlad King said, exasperated. He wasn't with the villains. He killed himself a few months prior to this attack and was turned into a Nomu in order to kill the students. Either that or something more terrifying. Tsukauchi said, as everyone looked at him. What do you mean? Vlad King asked. From what I heard on the boy, he wasn't from the world we are in right now. He is completely broken and shattered in the mind. He was talking about how he killed himself on a technicality of 3 different times. Tsukauchi said, as everyone looked at him concerned. What were the ways that it happened? Nezu asked. That was when Recovery Girl stepped in and told them about the first time he died, and everyone was disgusted with how it went. Going out in a blaze of glory, taking out a villain all because you were betrayed. What a way to go. Present Mike said, solemnly. Oh, that isn't all. Apparently, he blew up a version of Earth all because of the fact that he had lost his wife and child of a different life. Tsukauchi said, as everyone was on high alert. He blew up the entire planet. They all screamed. Yes, and he didn't even lie when I heard him mention it. The third time was our world's Izuku jumping off a roof. Tsukauchi said, as everyone was completely worried for the boy's mental state. If you are worried about his mentality, it is completely fine, even though he talks about death as if it isn't the end for people. Recovery Girl said, as she stacked some papers. These are the medical reports about what happened to his body, not to mention the number of quirks he has now. Tsukauchi said, as All Might paled at the number. Wait, there are only 3 here. Present Mike said, as All Might spoke up. This boy has 3 quirks because of the fact that they are all dragon-based. A draconic transformation, draconic instincts, and draconic lust. Oh my god. They tried to make him rape our female students. All Might said, moving over to a trash bin and threw up his lunch from earlier that day. Hearing this, everyone paled as they knew how hard it was for Yukio to keep herself from fucking every single male in the vicinity whenever she was going through a heat. Is there anything else we should be worried about, Recovery Girl? Nezu asked, as he looked at the old woman. You should be careful around the boy. He doesn't even trust me when it came to talking to him. He was very distant with me and Tsukauchi. He might try to make sure that we keep our distance until he knows he can trust us. The previous versions of us betrayed his sense of trust, and with his mind shattered and broken, he won't trust anyone until he can bring himself back from that point. Recovery Girl said, as she left the room. Izuku sat on the bed as he thought about everything that had happened to him. He still had the draconic powers he held when he died from the underworld. But he didn't know how much magic was in this world, so he would have to keep his own magic to himself. He didn't want people knowing that he could leave at any time he wished if he felt threatened. Since he was incredibly weak at the moment, he took any chance he had when someone came nearby to scare them into leaving him alone. It was about an hour later when a man entered the room. He had blonde hair, and the bangs were hanging low on his head as he stared at Izuku. It's you," the man said, as he looked completely guilty. All Might," Izuku asked, tears forming, jumped from the bed and decided to hug the man. All Might was concerned with what was happening but didn't stiffen in the hug as he returned it to the boy. It's been so long since I'll last seen you," Izuku said, as All Might looked at the boy worriedly. What do you mean by that, young man?" All Might asked. Why, you were my mentor in my world," Izuku said, as All Might looked at him slack-jawed. Izuku doesn't know how long the hug between him and All Might last, but the most he can do is alleviate the guilt that is within his hero about this version of his self's decision. As soon as the hug is pulled away from the other, Izuku looks at his mentor as All Might stared at the boy with tons of guilt piled on top of his already feeble mind. I'm sorry for the Izuku who was living his life of hell here. He didn't want you to think that you were the main cause of his death," Izuku said, as he was unknowingly crying. All Might places a hand behind the boy's back as he tried to get himself together. When he stops himself from crying, he looks at his mentor in the face. Is the others in the campus?" Izuku asked, worriedly. Nobody is here within the confines of this room, nor the school that might pose a threat to you," All Might said, as Izuku nodded his head. He sat on the cot as he thought about what they should be doing at the moment, and that is when All Might spoke up. "The staff of UA are trying to figure out what they should do about you. You were a young boy who was taken advantage of, a young boy who I sentenced to death, even though I was unaware of your status as well as what kind of day you had," All Might said, looking into Izuku's eyes. "Like I said, it wasn't entirely your fault. Bakugo told me something that day that you had no idea could cause me to jump," Izuku said, as All Might became alarmed. "Bakugo said something the same day I crushed your dreams," All Might asked, very concerned. "Why, yeah, I just never told you about it since I never took his advice, in the world I came from. In my world, Bakugo told me to commit suicide essentially. But the way he said it to me, made me know that he really didn't mean it. I am not sure about this version of me knew about this. Izuku said, as he looked at the floor remembering what the boy told him. Nobody would even care if a quirkless kid was committing suicide, nobody even cares about me. My mother doesn't even know about my existence, it's like she has forgotten about me. The new Izuku told his old self. Izuku remembered what the newer version of himself told him, and he couldn't help but relate to him as nobody cared for him in the old world he came from. The world with Issei and Searsex was long gone, and he probably will go to hell ironically for the sin of destroying the world. Are you all right, Midoriya Shonen? All Might asked. Will the students of this timeline get in trouble for what I tell you all? Izuku asked, showing that even when he was betrayed, he still cared for the well-being of others. It only depends on the severity of the problem at hand. All Might said, as Izuku looked at the ground with tears in his eyes. It regards how I died the first time. Izuku said, as All Might looked increasingly worried. Did you tell Tsukauchi about what happened in your first death? All Might asked, concerned. And not all of it, just that the UA teachers and some of the students here were behind it. Izuku said, as All Might nodded his head. What was I doing at the time of your death? All Might asked. All Might, you weren't there to protect me, because you were already dead. Izuku said, as All Might gains a fearful expression. In the teacher's lounge Aizawa Shota was laying on the couch. He had been injured slightly when that Shigaraki Tamura guy placed his fingers on his elbow. Being the pro that he was, he just had Chio heal him so that he could get back to work within the next few days. What he didn't prepare for was All Might entering the room with the kid that they were trying to figure out what to do with. Aizawa-san, we need to talk about what has happened in his timeline. All Might said, urgently. What do you mean, All Might? I am trying to get some much-needed rest, courtesy of Chio telling me to rest in order to get out on patrol tomorrow. Aizawa said, as he stared at the hero. Aizawa-san, this is about the first death young Midoriya had suffered from. All Might said, causing everything in Aizawa Shota's brain to malfunction and sit upright. What does that have to do about anything? Aizawa asked, increasingly annoyed. Midoriya Shonen, do you want to tell him about what happened? All Might asked the brat. I'll be fine telling everyone about it. The boy said, I guess you want me to bring everyone on the UA staff to hear about this? Aizawa asked, as he was groaning internally. Yes, Aizawa-san, we will need everyone present for this talk. It will be informative about what happened in the future. All Might said, as Aizawa said about contacting every single member of the staff. This had better be important, since I have a patrol tomorrow morning that I will be taking. Aizawa said, before heading towards the meeting room. Once everyone was gathered in the meeting room, Izuku stood in front of all the teachers, as he suddenly got stage fright. Are you sure that you want to talk about it yourself, Midoriya Shonen? All Might asked, concerned. The boy had been quiet for a while now and all the teachers were increasingly concerned as well as annoyed about it. Well, what do you all want to know first? Izuku asked, as he stared at the staff. What happened to Tamura Shigaraki after blowing yourself up? Present Mike asked, as all the teachers looked at him offended. What? Someone had to tear the band-aid off at some point. Present Mike called out. To answer your question, me and him were taken to another world, one where supernatural creature, such as angels, fallen angels, and many more species of them, roamed the world under the disguise of humans. Izuku said, as Present Mike looked a little miffed. Why did you choose to blow yourself up in the end, young man? That had to have been extremely painful to go out. Chio asked, devastatingly concerned. I was already on death's door, one of my classmates. Aoyama-kun. He blasted a hole through my chest as well as Shigaraki's chest after I had placed the quirk suppressant cuffs on his wrists. Izuku said, that doesn't answer my question, young man. Chio said, as she looked a little angered. That is what happened. I swear. I saw my classmates on a hill nearby and noticed how they were all looking at me like I was a villain. Well, most of them anyway. Izuku said, looking at the ground, tears brimming to the surface. Who were the ones behind the plan of killing you before you could defeat Shigaraki Tamura? Nezu asked as he stared at the boy. It was you, sir. Izuku said, as he looked at the chimera. What? The chimera asked, concerned. You came up with the idea that at some point down the road, I would become villainous to keep society safe from all villains. And it was you, Uraraka Ochako, Bakugo Katsuki, and all of Class 1A who devised my killing. You were behind the plan, the class were the ones to carry it out. Izuku said, looking at the ground as tears streamed down his face. He hated bringing up those memories, he had gotten over them as he didn't wish to see their faces ever again. Nezu was quiet as he thought about what actions Izuku displayed in that world to make him think that he would be a threat in the future. Can you tell us who out of us teachers allowed this kind of assassination plot to go out like this? Aizawa asked, finally speaking after an hour of hearing this. All of you were in on the idea, sir. But you, Izuku said, as everyone looked at the teacher in amazement. What do you mean all of us were in on having you killed? Aizawa asked, more concerned. All of the UA teachers, except for you, sir, were in on the assassination plot against me and Tamura Shigaraki. Izuku said. Aizawa sat down as he thought about what actions the problem child had done to warrant that kind of reaction from the principal. What actions have you done in your past that relegated Nezu of all people to think that assassinating a kid was really worth the lives saved in the future? Ectoplasm asked. None. I had basically sent myself into a fight knowing that there was a high probability that I'd die. Other than that, I basically went into every fight thinking that I'd be a martyr. Izuku said, looking away from All Might. Are you all right in the head, young man? Chiyo asked, increasingly concerned. No, I'm not all right. I have witnessed my friends, best friends betray me, was sent to another world where I became brothers with Shigaraki himself, gained a new family only to watch as they were killed in front of me. Only to then not even 10 days later blow up an entire planet in rage at how I lost the family I had worked so hard to get. Izuku said, as he fell to his knees crying. He hadn't had the time to let everything sink in as he felt that he shouldn't need to cry, he was the upcoming symbol of peace in his world. And to have it taken away from him based on a baseless rumor, hurt. Then to be reborn into another realm where supernatural creatures of the night were basically saying hello to humans on the daily. Create a new family after gaining enough power to essentially fight God, only to lose them because some humans didn't wish to have supernatural powers lording their skills and might over them. It really fucked his brain up to the point that he just wanted his life to be over, just like the boy who he sent to the afterlife, the boy who just wanted to die. Before he could devolve into more deprecating thoughts, one of the teachers stopped him before he could. Looking up with watery eyes, he found that it was both his mentor from another world, and Aizawa-sensei who gave him the much-needed hug he needed. Leaning into the hug he cried out as all the pain and suffering he had gone through came out as he held onto them like they were a lifeline, like if he didn't let go, they would disappear. As soon as Izuku calmed himself down, he didn't know how tired he had been when he suddenly passed out in Aizawa's arms. Looking up from the sleeping boy, Aizawa looked at each and every teacher in the room and sighed heavily. Can someone please get this problem child off me before I try and adopt him? He asked. Izuku was walking around the halls of Ua as he tried to remember what happened back in his old world to it. The school that he remembered had become a sky base where the heroes could stay on whilst the heroes were on the patrol on the ground when villains attacked. He looked at every nook and cranny of the place as he remembered what had happened back in the original place he came from. The building was used as a primary battlefield for him and Shigaraki as they battled it out before changing locations. Izuku sighs as he tried to hide those horrifying memories in the vault of his mind, never wishing to see them again. As it showcased how much nobody had ever cared about him, even when he had a quirk, they still wished to never help him. The only one who seemed to wish to help him was Ochako and Tsuyu, but they were outnumbered by his classmates. They probably didn't have a choice in the matter before they had everyone attack him in the last moment of the fight between him and Shigaraki. As he was exiting the building, he saw that there were some students milling about the area as they were waiting for the next day of school. There was a striking difference between his world and this one though. This version of his school had the dorms many months earlier instead of after the fight with All for One and the summer camp incident. He had to prepare his classmates for when those events happened since if they weren't ready for it, Then some of them had the possibility of dying instead of surviving it like he remembered. From what it seemed like everything was placed back at the USJ attack in terms of timelines, so he knew that he had more than a few months before the whole summer camp attack. He also knew about what would happen to Ingenium against Stain, since in his world Ingenium was paralyzed from the waist down and rendered useless as a hero. Retired before he could even reach his 30s, and that wasn't how the young man was supposed to retire. He was supposed to retire at the ripe time of old age. Or when he felt was the perfect time to do so as a middle-aged young man. He was so busy thinking about the future events that he never noticed that some of Class 1A were moving towards him. "Hey, are you okay out here?" A feminine voice called out. Turning around faster than the group could react, he found that it was Yayorozu who spoke to him as she had a hand over his left shoulder. Shrugging her off as fast as he could, Izuku stared into the eyes of each and every student of Class 1A as he ran off into a different direction of them. But there was only one thing on his mind as he left them. Their faces might have shown concern for him in the moment, but he knew that in the future, they would become enemies. He couldn't let his guard down in front of them, and he couldn't afford to make friends with people who betrayed him in his old world. He knows that this kind of thinking is wrong, but can you blame him? He dies after blowing himself up because of being betrayed by his entire class except for a select few, then he is reborn as a dragon. The son of one of the more powerful figures in history, only to have a wife and child killed in front of him, causing him to become so angered that he blew up the planet in his sorrow-filled rage. He couldn't trust anyone, not villains, not heroes, and certainly not the girl he had placed his entire trust in because of one betrayal. As he hid inside the forest behind Heights Alliance, without noticing it was even there, he transformed into his draconic form and dug out a cave for him to sleep inside of. Morning came as Izuku found himself underground, and he heard the sounds of movement outside of his cave. "I can't believe that he had dug this hole in one night." A voice called out. He was extremely scared. "Didn't you see the cameras from the location over there?" Another said, as Izuku's growling was heard rumbling from inside the cave. "Ah, it seems like our visitor is awake." A familiar rodent-like voice called out, causing Izuku to climb out of the cave. What nobody was prepared for was the fact that Izuku was in his draconic form as his head poked out first. It seemed to appear similar to a hydra's head in terms of looks, but anything beyond that was completely different since he had the body and wingspan of a Western dragon. As soon as Izuku stepped out of his makeshift cave, he looked down on the humans as well as rodent of Nezu as they stared at him in awe. "I think he is taller than MT. Lady when she uses her gigantification quirk," Nezu said, as Izuku's draconic voice rumbled out a tune that Hound Dog caught. "Is that a humming sound?" the hero asked, as Izuku looked down at the dog man. Transforming back into his human form with some clothes on, he stared at the teachers as well as guidance counselor with slight caution. "Yes, I can communicate with you all in my draconic form as well. But it's been a while since then, but I would advise keeping her away from me during January and March," Izuku said, as the teachers and Nezu looked at him. "Why would you say that?" Midnight asked, as Nezu spoke up for Izuku. "Draconic heats. They last multiple months, and unless you wish to be impregnated during the night of fun, you should stay as far away from his cave as possible." "But he should have really kept it away from Heights Alliance," Nezu said, as Izuku looked at the hero in question. "Heights Alliance?" Izuku asked, as the principal pointed behind himself. And sure enough, if Izuku strained his draconic eyes enough, he could see Heights Alliance's building not far from there. "If one of the female students came out finding this cave, you might as well just seal it shut since you wouldn't be capable of stopping yourself, would you?" Nezu asked, as Izuku looked away. "We will keep the students away from the cave system, just make sure that when you have your heats, that you build a nest in a mountain or volcano in order to deal with them then," Nezu said, as Izuku nodded his head. "What happened in your world to make you so afraid of people in general?" Nezu asked, as Izuku talked about how society treated him in his old world. How when he was quirkless, they never really cared about him, and that the only one who really did was his mother. And outside of her it was some of his classmates who never made comments about him being quirkless before having a quirk, they just never knew about the problems of being quirkless. Well, I would hope that you get over your fear of people soon, since you will be placed within the school grounds for learning what you never got to in your world. Nezu said, as Izuku looked at the rodent closely. I will have you know that I am technically a second-year student. In my world, the war between the heroes and villains started on the last day of our first year of UA. And by all technicalities, I am a second year in terms of knowledge. Izuku said, as Nezu nodded his head. Your homeroom teacher will be present, Mike, if that is the case. I hope your time spent with Class 1A will be filled with happiness as well as lowered guards. The principal said, as he left Izuku alone. When do I head to class? Izuku asked, as All Might looked at the boy and decided to throw him a bone. As soon as you manage to overcome your fear of others with Class 1A. The hero said, as Izuku nodded his head. Izuku stood near the entrance of Class 1A's dorms as he held a trembling hand over the door. He had no idea that those inside the building were looking at him standing in front of it with a sour look. Geez, what makes it so hard to enter a building? A young woman with red hair said, as she opened the door for him. Izuku looked at the girl with a morbid confusion since she was never there in his world, since he took that seat. Who are you? Izuku asked, as the girl stared at him. Well, my name is Elizabeth Tatarogan, and I am the... She paused as she looked in different directions. Successor to All Might, the girl said, as Izuku nodded his head as he walked into the building with her. Based on her features, she was completely quirkless, and she told him that she was before gaining All Might's quirk as well. Izuku was ecstatic that there was another person like him, well before meeting All Might and dying, that is. Well, what is your name? Future guy, Tatarogan asked, as she stared at him. Midoriya, Izuku, the boy said, as he kept taking glances at her hair. Hey, my eyes are down here, she said as she pouted. Sorry, just never saw someone with hair like yours, Izuku said, as the girl smirked. Well, too bad, I am Arrow. I don't like being in relationships anyway, the girl said, as Izuku blushed crimson. Noted, but why is everyone staring at me? Izuku asked, as the girl looked around. They've been staring at you standing at the doorframe for the last 14 minutes and counting. Wondering when you would open the door or run off again, the girl said, as Izuku nodded his head. Tatarogan was a beautiful young woman who had long red hair that was curled on the ends. She had a nice set of cyan blue eyes, and her body was similar to Yaoyorozu's from his world. As Izuku reacquainted himself with his old class, Iida came into the room and started talking about what Izuku should be doing instead of sleeping out in the cold rain at night. You are aware that I am a dragon, right? Izuku asked, as the young man continued. I know that you're a dragon, Midoriya-kun, but that doesn't mean that you should sleep in the cold rain. What if you catch a cold? The young man who was a stickler for the rules questioned. Iida-san, I can't get diseases, unless they are literally placed in me, Izuku said, as he stared at the young man. You, never mind, the boy said, as Izuku chuckled weakly. He went to sit down on the couch when a brown-haired girl sat down next to him. Hey, I'm Ochako. Not sure if you knew me from your world, but I would like to get to know you more, Ochako said, as she looked into Izuku's slitted eyes. Nice to meet you, again, Izuku said, as the girl cheered. Can I touch your horns? Ochako asked, as Izuku leaned downward once more. Sure, but make sure to take responsibility for them, Izuku said, as his beating heart started to slow. As Ochako started to rub his horns, everyone watched as Izuku slowly but surely began to purr in her presence. The girl herself was blushing as everyone heard Izuku go from being an incredibly powerful dragon to being basically a little cat in Ochako's hands. To think that a dragon of his caliber could be defeated by a kid who just wanted to pet him, Katsuki said, as he chuckled. Izuku was about to make a retort when he felt another hand over his horns, causing him to redden and lean into the touch. Looking to his right, he found that it was Suyu specifically doing this, as she had a neutral look on her face. You were about to say something rude to him, so I decided to do this in order to make sure you keep it to yourself. He was trying to get a rise out of you, he does it with everyone, Suyu said, as Izuku nodded his head. I know, I had known him for a literal decade, Izuku mumbled, thinking nobody had heard it. But unknown to him, and some other people in the room. A girl with earlobes that were similar to earphone jacks heard him as she gained a concerned expression. If you're a dragon, that means that you have a heat cycle, correct? Momo asked, as she pulled out a notebook. Why yeah, but it only lasts from January to the end of March. So please stay away from my little cave in the back, Izuku said, as all the girls stared at him. Well, I guess I will just go near it when that happens, Tadorogan said, as Izuku stared at her. You really wouldn't. I am not myself when I am in a heat, Izuku said, as his face became red. Please, I punched Yukio in the face, and she was many times stronger than me, and she praised me for the punch actually knocking out teeth. The girl said, smugly. Tadorogan-san, my draconic form is massively more powerful than Yukio, and you wouldn't live to see the next day if you said that to my draconic form, when he wants to fuck the lights out of something or someone. Izuku warned. I relish the challenge from a being more powerful than the number 10 heroine, the girl said, as Izuku sighed in exasperation. Is she always like this? Izuku asked as some of the girls nodded. Well, in terms of learning education, I am literally in the next grade. See you all at lunch when I am allowed into the school to learn, Izuku said, leaving the dorms. As he left, everyone looked at Tadorogan as she licked her lips at the retreating Izuku as he closed the doors. Are you sure that you're Arrow? Ochako asked, as the girl stared at her. I am, but if I wasn't I would be after him by tomorrow. Did you see his biceps? The girl gushed. As the girls devolved into a gossiping fit, the boys thought about how there was another guy who made the girls not look in their direction. As for Katsuki, he stared at Izuku walking off in the rain as he thought about the words he told him all those months ago. I'm going to make up for what kind of sorry bastard I was to you, Izuku, mark my words. It has been about a few days since Izuku had been with Class 1A and he had been training on his own within his own mind. He had been mentally training himself so that he couldn't get taken off guard like he did in the world he came back from. Sensing the world around himself, he noticed how the magic traces in it was completely different from theirs. They hadn't been touched in millenniums since the death of God in this world. So the god of this realm is gone too. Shame. He could have been an excellent training partner for me in this world to get stronger, Izuku thought to himself as he image trained with Shigaraki's draconic form in his head. Image training was what Izuku had to do in order to get more power so that he could get a decent workout for his power as well as strength. He was the strongest being in his world, third only to Great Red, Ophis and Searzex, the last few beings who were just too strong for any of the Chaos Brigade tried to kill. In terms of bodies, Izuku's body in that dimension would be revived, but with a different soul. And that is the world he sent his other soul to. He wanted him to live out a life that was peaceful as well as filled with people who would become friends with him. It was a gift he could give the Izuku of this world, since his body was used and manipulated by Shigaraki Tamura and all for one of these worlds to get back at All Might for what the hero did to the supervillain. Meditating in the yard in the rain, Izuku focused his mind on fighting the Shigaraki he knew and came to become brothers with as they fought in the skies. Quirks weren't a factor here as both people were dragons and could fly regardless of letting out their wings or not. He was in the middle of releasing an attack when he was startled out of his meditation by a bony hand on his left shoulder. Opening his eyes, he looked up and saw his former mentor standing above him with a sad smile on his face. So young Midoriya, how has your time with Class 1A been? The old hero asked, curiously. It's been quiet. I haven't been able to create any friendships because of what happened to my first death, Izuku said, before pausing a second. I know that it isn't healthy to be constantly living in the past, but I don't know how to trust the class, when they were the ones who declared that I had to die, Izuku said, as he found the words he wanted to say. Young man, I know that trust is earned, and not given. But from what you are saying it seems like you need some therapy in order to become a better person. You can't help people alone. That is what you wish to do, correct? All Might asked. More than anything, I just am too scared to open my heart to friends again. Not after they essentially abandoned me, and decided that it was easier to kill me rather than stop me, Izuku said, as tears brimmed at the corners of his eyes. Yes, I know, but sometimes, a hero has to overcome those fears in order to come out on top. Will you be able to in the future? I know you can, but will it happen now? Not yet. We are trying to get you to establish some kind of a relationship with Class 1A, not try and force a friendship onto you. All Might said, as the old hero sat down next to Izuku. So, what brought you out here in the rain with me, All Might? Izuku asked, as he sat straighter. Well, I wanted to see why you had been sitting out in the rain. Thinking that you'd get a cold but forgot that you were a literal dragon so you wouldn't get one. The old hero said, chuckling near the end. Yeah, sometimes I forget that I am completely unharmed by rainy weather. But I had been image training in my head, trying to increase my power in order to get stronger than I was yesterday. Izuku said, as the hero stared at him. Pray tell, how strong were you from the world you came from? All Might asked, curiously. I was the third strongest being on the planet there. Just under beings who are called dragon gods. Their names were Ophis and Great Red. I know that Red's name isn't all that much good, but he didn't have any other names we could call him. But Ophis was the more problematic one than Great Red. Izuku said, as All Might looked at him questioningly. What do you mean by Ophis being more problematic than Great Red? The hero asked. Ophis was the dragon god of infinity. Her power was nigh infinite, and would constantly fight Great Red for control over a dimension that was as infinite as her power. The dimensional gap, Izuku said, as the hero breathed it out. The dimensional gap. The hero breathed out the question. Yes, it was called the dimensional gap. It was a massive room that spanned for billions of light years, and in all directions, all you could see was a massive expansion of nothingness. And Ophis had called the place her home since it was the one thing she requested from everything in existence. Izuku said, looking to the sky. What would that be? All Might asked. All she wanted was some peace and quiet, Izuku said, as the old hero sputtered and spat out blood. Seriously, she was so problematic because of the fact that she wanted to go back to her home. All Might asked, incredulously. Yes, and the only thing stopping her from going back there and staying in that gap of a dimension was Great Red's presence there. Izuku said. What did he tell her off and try and get her to leave? All Might asked, as Izuku gave him a look. All Might, he moved in when Ophis had left because he was getting sick and tired of humanity and the factions of that world staring at him all the time. And since he moved into the dimensional gap, Ophis had wanted to go back only to find that the massive dragon that was Great Red had moved in. So she took to him like she would any others who annoyed her. Izuku said, as All Might looked at him worriedly. What would that be? He asked. She constantly fought him, trying to kick him out of her home, only for she herself to be kicked out by his massive power. Great Red's power is the power over dreams. It is a really broken ability if you think about it really. Izuku said, as he pulled out a notebook writing it down. What are you talking about? Like, does he get more powerful by dreaming or something? All Might asked. Right in the down under. Great Red's power comes from his dreaming to be more powerful than a certain opponent who becomes as strong as him. Anything he states as his dream will come true. That was why she couldn't defeat him over the countless millions of years that they had fought there. Since he could literally wish to be more powerful than infinity, she couldn't defeat him since he could dream to be more powerful than her every single fight. Izuku said, as the hero sighed. Sounds like squabbling of some children of some sort. All Might mumbled, not thinking Izuku heard him. Oh, it was. I was surprised to find out that they were literally children who were fighting over a literal space in the dimensional gap. Even though there was millions upon millions of light years worth of space for both of them to reside within. Izuku said, as the old hero stood up. Young Midoriya, would you care for a spar with an old man? All Might asked, looking at the boy. Did you find your successor? Izuku asked. Nope, the hero said, buffing up and jumping off. Okay, guess I'm doing this now, Izuku said, jumping off after the pro hero. Inside an office within the school, a rat, bear, dog thing had been watching the interaction with a smile on his face. To think that the counterpart of me inside an alternate universe ever thought that such a boy like him was dangerous. The creature said, as he smiled at the cameras displaying how Izuku and All Might were moving about a gym fighting it out. He had gotten so much more powerful in another universe and brought that power over here, and now he can truly destroy the world if he so pleases. Now this is a massive turn of events. The creature said, looking behind him at the other teachers. Let's see what this heavenly dragon do to our prized symbol of peace. Another voice said, as he stepped up revealing it was Aizawa Shota. Landing in the middle of Gym Gamma, Izuku and All Might stared at one another as they were in a lock of wrists in the air. The amounts of gusts of air blowing from both sides of them were massive, as they blew apart the buildings within the gym. Grabbing the hero's left arm, Izuku flipped the hero over his shoulder and went to slam him towards the ground as he held onto the hero's arm with one hand. Creating a large crater inside the gym, Izuku moved to attack once more when he was smacked right in the face with a Detroit smash from All Might. Being sent skidding backwards, All Might moved towards Izuku, charging in to gain the advantage of putting Izuku on the backburner. The young boy was dodging each and every attack with such precision that the number one hero began to smile at the fact that having someone as powerful as himself was such a great boost of strength giving. I would like to clean Dagobah Beach after this, All Might, Izuku said, as he stared at the hero. Are you asking what I think you're asking? All Might asked, slightly concerned. No, I already had an All Might. And I don't want to replace mine who died to the hands of All for One. Izuku said, as All Might stared at him. No, that's not what I was asking you, young Midoriya. All Might called out, as they stopped in the middle of the crater. Then what were you going to ask? Izuku thought aloud. Well, I was thinking that you were going to ask me to give my quirk to you. Since you already had me give it to you in the world you originally came from. All Might said, as Izuku looked at him in shock. If I had asked you that, would you have said, yes? Izuku asked, looking for something in the hero's eyes to say no. Yes, I would have given it to you since your heart is that of a hero. You stopped a villain attack on school grounds without my assistance, and it seemed that I only got in your way. But if it would help you to gain more power in order to protect the world as well as the people within. I would give one for all to you no matter what happens. All Might said, as Izuku smiled as tears streamed down his face. Well, let's get this spar done and over with so we can clean that beach. Izuku said, smiling at his hero. Anytime, young Midoriya, All Might called out. I'm going to show you my full power form, All Might. You deserve to know how much more powerful I am than any of the beings on this planet are. Izuku said, as All Might nodded his head. Standing a far distance away from All Might, Izuku began to charge his magic into his body to initiate his transformation. From within the principal's office, the teachers and the principal watched on in awe with All Might as Izuku powered up as his body began to physically change. From his head it started there in order to show some horns that were growing from near the sides of his temples as they grew into a bull's horns but more ringed. Then out of his back came emerald green wings that held scales on the protrusions near the leathery wings. Izuku's whole body became a glow of emerald and jade as his height began to trump All Might's in a matter of seconds. Within a few seconds of being taller than All Might, Izuku began to growl as an aura appeared around his body. The green sparks of electricity appeared around his body as his aura showed a blue hue to it as he reached the maximum height that he could reach in his draconic form, 120 meters high and 240 meters wide. All Might was looking at a monster of a dragon, but when he looked at the dragon's face, he could swear that he could see the slitted eyes of a cat, and that it looked like a dragon from the Western variety. So this is your true form. I wonder how much power you hold in it. All Might asked, as he got into a punching form. I would highly advise against going for a punch, All Might, Izuku's draconic form said, as he stared down at the hero. What would happen if I were to follow through with a punch on your snout? All Might taunted, as the dragon laughed. Your hand would break from the toughness of my maw, and I would like to show you what my breath of poison as well as fire can do to this entire area. So hop onto my back and see the light show, Izuku said, as he lowered his head for the hero. Climbing onto the dragon's head, All Might held onto the horns on top of its head as the head lifted higher into the air, sucking as much air as possible to release. All Might looked at the eyes of the dragon and found that they glowed when he was about to release his flaming poison attack. In just a matter of seconds the dragon released his breath, and the entire gym was put up in flames from the epicenter of the attack hitting the ground of the crater. The flames moved about the gym searching for a victim to hurt as it caused buildings to melt from the sheer intensity of the heat within a full minute of being released. All Might sucked in a massive breath that he didn't know he wasn't taking in as he watched the entire gym be utterly annihilated from the single attack alone. That wasn't even his full power. All Might thought to himself as he knew that Izuku was holding back tremendously. As the teachers in the principal's office watched on in horror at one of their gyms being officially rendered to toast, one of them began to laugh hysterically. "Aizawa, are you okay?" Vlad King asked, worriedly. "Do you know what we had done in the other dimension?" Aizawa asked, between his fits of hysterical laughter. "What is it?" Nezu asked. "You royally fucked up if you thought that if he doesn't get sent back that he couldn't kill everyone. He could annihilate the planet from that very attack alone if it does that much collateral damage in a full minute." Aizawa said, pointing to the screen. "Young Midoriya, do you wish to become my successor after training your body to use my power?" All Might asked, as he stared at the dragon beneath himself. "I would love to become your student again, All Might. If I could change anything about what happened to my world, it was your death at the hands of All for One at Kamino," Izuku said, staring at the hero once again. The hero nodded his head as he jumped off Izuku's draconic head and landed with a huff on the ground as Izuku's form lowered enough to reveal that he was as naked as the day he was born. Midoriya Shonen, you might want to get some clothes on," All Might said, with a slight sweat drop on his face. Izuku asked, before looking down. "Oh god damn it," Izuku called out, as he ran off. Izuku woke up within the house that Principal Nezu had acquired for him on the land of Ua. He had no idea as to how the rodent could afford all this money to give him a house essentially for free, but he wouldn't take any kindness and throw it out the window. He walked through his home as he stared at all the things that were missing from his old room as they were displayed for all to see around his halls. All of his hero merchandise from his old apartment were brought here in order to make sure that his stay here was more comfortable. He knew that he would have to face the 1A class soon, but damn it, he really wanted to stay home and do his homework there. He found his kitchen as he started on making some breakfast that he found was delicious from Issei's world. Bacon, eggs, milk as well as cinnamon toast. That was what he was talking about. Get your minds out of the gutter. He was purely thinking happy thoughts, not about his dead family, that he will never get to experience this with ever again. Izuku stopped making his breakfast as he remembered Seraphal's face whenever he made breakfast for the family. He even remembered his daughter's look whenever he did something cool in her eyes, and now he felt his tears coming back out in terrifying amounts. Finishing his breakfast, he sat the dishes at the table as he went and sat down at the couch within his living room as he felt every emotion that was brought over from the loss of his family. Pulling his legs towards his chest as well as placing his face on his knees, he sobbed as he tried to calm himself down from the memories of his wife and daughter being killed in front of him. He was about to devolve more into his nightmarish memories when a knock was heard on his door. Wondering who it was, he moved towards the door, completely forgetting that he was crying moments earlier. When he opened the door, he never expected to see one of his teachers standing before him with a gift basket as she looked at him in alarm. "Midoriya-kun, what is wrong? Is something wrong with the house?" Midnight asked as she looked at him worryingly. "And no. Just remembering my family," Izuku said, as more tears came out. Midnight placed the gift basket down on the porch as she asked if she could come inside as Izuku moved to the side allowing her in. Pulling the gift basket with her so that it wouldn't get forgotten outside, she placed it on the table as she noticed the breakfast that was all alone at the table. "Are you going to eat your breakfast?" she asked, concerned. It was amplified as Izuku's tears came out even more in force as he sat back down at the couch as she moved closer to him so she could find out the problem. As it would turn out for Nimari Kayama, she would not have expected to find their new arrival of Izuku Midoriya to be having an emotional breakdown within his own home because of what he made for breakfast. She had been tasked with bringing Izuku his gift basket in order to welcome him to the world, as well as Ua Academy, only to find Izuku crying at the door when he opened it. Sitting down next to him, she tried her best in order to calm his raging emotions of sadness as well as regret as she rubbed his back as he sobbed into his knees. "Is there something wrong with the breakfast?" Nimari asked. I remember having a breakfast like that, before watching my wife and daughter in another world," Izuku said, before pausing leaving the rest to be picked at. Nimari almost immediately picked up on the pausing as well as the problem at hand. Izuku lost his family in another world as they were eating breakfast, and they were killed in front of him. It would have been extremely traumatizing for him to watch that happen with him being incapable of doing anything to stop it from happening. So she just pulled him into her chest as he sobbed for a long while, and she rubbed his back as he heard her speak sweet nothings into his ear in order to calm him down. It would take another hour before another knock would be heard on the door, and as soon as nobody would answer the door, it would be broken down by an alert All Might. Only for the man to look at the scene with either fear or sadness as she was found holding a passed-out Izuku on her chest as his tail and wings were out on display for him to see. "Remind me to knock louder to wake him up next time," All Might said, now in his smaller form. They were eating the breakfast that Izuku had made as the boy hadn't seemed to want to eat it anymore. As they were eating, All Might talked to her about how he was supposed to be training Izuku in earning his power as well as making sure that he could clean a beach nearby. "So your training regimen is just him cleaning a beach?" Nimari asked, curiously. "I don't know if his body is well prepared or not for one for all. I just hope that he is capable of using it since from what he was saying, he was capable of using 45% of it as well as the other wielder's quirks in order to make a pseudo 100%. All Might said, as Nimari smiled at him. "If he is as powerful as you say he is, wouldn't his power of being a dragon kind of offset the quirk?" Nimari asked. "I don't know, and that was what we're going to find out as soon as he wakes up and cleans Dagobah Beach," All Might said, as he stared at the sleeping Izuku. "If you're wondering why I was consoling him this morning, he had an emotional breakdown that I was only around to see the ending of. He had been through a lot from the world he came back from, and it left him completely traumatized as well as being overly distant with those who he knew was going to die or betray him," Nimari said, as All Might had started to think to himself. "Should we send him to Hound Dog for sessions?" All Might asked, as Nimari could only smile at him. It was times like this that she could always tell people that All Might wasn't as stupid as Aizawa would always say he was. He could see the issues that Midoriya was having and was thinking of a solution that would come of it. It was here that Izuku finally woke up from his slumber as he moved into the kitchen and completely forgone the whole emotional breakdown as he ate his own breakfast. "Hello there, young Midoriya," All Might said, as Izuku gave him a nod. "Mornin', what happened to make me so tired not too long ago?" Izuku asked, slurring his words. "You had an emotional breakdown, Izuku. I think you should speak to someone about your other life," Nimari said, as Izuku stared at her for a moment. "Is there anyone nearby I can talk to about that? I wouldn't want to disturb anyone with my problems," Izuku said, as Nimari sadly smiled at him. "Don't worry about that, young man. Hound Dog is a certified therapist. And he talks to the students who are having a hard time at school as well as need therapy," Nimari said, as Izuku nodded his head. Pulling a phone from seemingly out of nowhere, Izuku called the Hound Hero in order to schedule a meeting with him about his old life. Once that was done, Izuku fully woke up as he stretched his back and arms before stretching his legs. Once that was done, Izuku looked over at his old mentor as the man stared at him with a mirth that was not left alone by Nimari. "Well, if you are done with breakfast, let's head over to Dagobah, so we can start your strength training," All Might said, as Izuku walked outside the house with him. "You can stay here if you want, Midnight-san. I wouldn't mind," Izuku said, offhandedly as he closed the door. Once his presence and All Might's were gone, Midnight looked at the doorway as she smiled at the gift basket. "Well, now that he is gone, how about I prepare him something that he is bound to like when he gets back? Oh, I just hope he tries to take me. I haven't been capable of getting a boyfriend ever since Shota came out as gay," Midnight said, as she grabbed the basket and left for one of the rooms. "Get your minds out of the gutters." Evil smiley face. As Izuku and All Might arrived at the beach, Izuku could remember the amount of time it took him to clean the beach back then. It was to get him prepared for the entrance exams as well as to allow him the time to be capable of holding the power. Now though, he is stronger than All Might by a wide margin, and he could probably bench press the planet as a workout if he wanted to. So as he moved forward towards the beach, his mentor began to speak to him. "All right, young Midoriya, we are only doing this for a couple of days. From what your strength and power show me, you are more than capable of wielding my power, and within the next couple of days, you will be cleaning the beach in order to make sure that it is clean for everyone to use," All Might said, as Izuku had already began training. It was hilarious to see the man's face as Izuku was already lifting the truck as well as another semi out of the area like it was nothing. It had been a few hours since they had arrived, and Izuku had already cleared about 25% of the beach within that time slot. I believe that will be enough for us today. You did a good job of clearing the beach in quick succession. To think that you already did this before, now I think I am losing power over your training. The man huffed as they walked back towards Ua. Well, I did clear it before in my world, but if it makes you feel better, it took me 10 months to clear it without the use of a quirk of power from the world I just came here from. Izuku said, as the hero laughed. 10 months. This will take you at least 4 days. I can't believe that you have gotten so much stronger since you last met me before my death in your world. All Might laughed, as Izuku gained a sour look. All Might, did Sir Night-Eye give you the death threat as well in this world? Izuku asked, as the man nodded. Yes, although he said my death would be a bit different from how you experienced it. He said that I would die as an old man who was incapable of moving. He even said that I'd be in a wheelchair. All Might chuckled as Izuku started to chuckle as well. There is the smile I have been looking for. The man said, as Izuku looked up at him. What do you mean? Izuku asked. Well, ever since you first came here, you had always been sad as well as frowning since you were found at the USJ. I just hope that hound dog will be able to help you in clearing your mind that it wasn't your fault that your family died. I know that, it's just. I wish I could have been faster. I could have saved them if I was just a bit stronger. Izuku said, clenching his fists. Did I ever tell you what my master told me a long time ago? All Might asked. No, what did she tell you? Izuku asked, as All Might looked to the sky. She told me that the heroes who smile are the ones who are the strongest. I take what she taught me and bring it out in others. I make them go plus ultra since I am going to retire soon. But from what she told me, it seems like I should teach the same onto you. I can only hope that your smile can come out more often. All Might said, as Izuku sadly smiled. It might take a long time, All Might. Izuku said, as he looked at the sunset. That is something that I have time for. Also, I take that as a challenge. The hero said, as Izuku and him laughed. They soon arrived at Izuku's home within Ua as they were closing in on the small house in the middle of the woods. Well, this is where I will drop you off at. See you tomorrow, young Midoriya. All Might said, as Izuku smiled at the man fully. As he walked over to his house, he could smell something good being made in the kitchen, so he walked into it only to bleed out of his nose. Standing in his kitchen at the stove was a naked woman who had long navy blue hair as she swayed her ass as she danced to the music that she was playing. She was so into her music that she hadn't heard Izuku return back to the house, and now that he was here, he couldn't keep his eyes off of her. A horny part of his mind tried to reason with him that since he was now single that he could take her now, but the logical part of his mind would state that he would be attempting to replace Seraphol. But the logical side was slowly losing on the battle as his body moved towards the heroine as she danced at the stove making whatever she was making. Within a few more seconds Izuku was standing behind the woman as he poked her on the shoulder, gaining her attention, and as she turned around, she accidentally smacked him in the face with her breasts. As that happened, Izuku was sent to the ground as she casually slipped and fell on top of him in a role reversal kind of eki anime. And Izuku was blushing profusely as Midnight stared into his eyes as his body was underneath her as she was above him as she lifted her body upright. Izuku's eyes kept their strength going for her eyes as she looked down at him from above him, and she smiled at him. Giving him a wink before jumping off of him, she went back to cooking as she asked him a question. So when did you get back? She asked, as she cooked. I got back a few minutes ago. Entered the kitchen to find my teacher, who is beautiful by the way, in here cooking something. Izuku said, muttering the beautiful part. Thank you for the compliment, but you are being too humble. Well, I am making katsudon. I believe that you stated that it was your favorite before being taken to another world. Midnight asked, as she looked at him receiving a nod. The food was being created further before Izuku felt his pants tighten as he stood up from the table abruptly. I'm going to take care of something real fast, Izuku said, zipping away from the kitchen. Well, it seems like my mastery is needed, Midnight said, as she placed the dishes in the microwave to keep them warm as she licked her lips and followed Izuku's trail towards where he was. Izuku was cleaning the beach again as he looked out at the ocean as it was seemingly showing everything that he remembered from his world, before it went to shit. Izuku had been cleaning the beach for the last few hours and was almost complete with it as he was clearing up the last big pile of garbage as well as broken vehicles in it. As he used his draconic strength to finish up the cleaning, he never noticed how All Might had been watching him from afar on the railing as he stared out at the ocean in happiness as well as awe. He's truly the only one who could wield the power. I can see why my alternate universe self had chosen you. Young Midoriya, All Might mumbled to himself as he saw the sun set over the chiseled body of Izuku. He smiled as Izuku cleared up the last of the garbage and was slowly making his way back up the steps to his master. You've done well, young man. I am so proud of your progress as well as the amount of time you've spent with Class 1A. All Might said, smiling. I said this in my universe dimension, but all of this feels forced, and it feels like I forced you to pass on your quirk to me instead of you choosing me. Izuku said, as tears came out of his eyes. Don't worry, young man, I am fully believing that you are the right successor for me. I had all the time in the world to get past the barriers that you erected up based on past experiences to protect your mind and heart. And all I can see is a young boy just asking for some help. A young boy who all he wishes to become is a hero. All Might said, as he plucked a hair from his head. You have spent these last 4 days clearing this beach up in order to gain my power. And this was earned, if you never cleared the beach within these 4 days. I wouldn't have given you the quirk. All Might said. As Izuku nodded his head, the man lowered the hair into Izuku's hand as he smiled at the boy. I will try to live to your expectations. Izuku said, sobbing. As of right now, Izuku can see his hero standing before him with a smile, something that he had missed in his world since All for One killed him at Kamino after their clash caused his unconscious state. As of right now, Izuku looked at All Might, and he could only see a man that would soon lose his quirk and be killed at Kamino brutally. See, can you promise me something, All Might? Izuku looked up at his mentor. Anything, young Midoriya, All Might said, staring at the boy. When you fight All for One in Kamino, please make sure that you keep an eye on the body of All for One. Izuku said, as All Might stared in confusion. So he really is alive. I thought I had killed him in our last encounter. All Might said, thinking to himself. All Might, in my world you kept your eye off of his body and he gained the upper hand by waking himself up for a microsecond and pierced you through your chest with multiple quirks ending your life. Please don't lower your guard when you think the man is down. Izuku pleaded with the hero as All Might pulled Izuku in for a hug. Don't worry, Midoriya Shonen, I will do my best in order to make sure that death does not come to pass. All Might said, as he stared at his student. About 3 hours later, Izuku was seen at Uwa training by himself as he was using the power of One for All to his benefit. The young man had managed to gain control of around 15% of the power with just small amounts of training after revealing that since he had it before he could use the power again just as well. He and All Might could be seen battling it out in Gym Gamma as the old hero was fighting Izuku, who had years of experience under his belt in terms of fighting like him. It was so much fun to fight a successor who was taught to learn how to wield his power with a lower percentage as well as attempt to increase his power to meet his own. The hero moved about the area as he attacked the boy with his full power since the boy said, if he doesn't get stronger as fast as possible, then people will die in the future. The hero, taking these words to heart, had fully gone on the offensive to fight his student with all his power. He was genuinely surprised that when he used the power, he gave him after about 3 hours that his defense had increased dramatically. Without the quirk he was capable of withstanding 75% of his power without being launched from the ground. But now, he could withstand 100% for a few seconds of clashes before being launched from the ground. They were clashing their fists against one another. As they were doing this, Nezu had some of the third years watching the battle in front of them. He wanted to use this training regimen for Izuku to be an eye-opener for them, that there will always be an opponent who will show up with power close or similar to All Might in his prime. All Might and Izuku went blow for blow, landing hit after hit on their stomach, arms, legs, and heads. Izuku had the advantage in speed since the young man had already had him beat in his own power, but with One for All the boy had surpassed him in both speed and power. The only thing that the hero had on the boy was that he had more experience than him, As the boy only had around 30 years of experience, he had around 45 years of experience in fighting. But there was nothing that he couldn't laugh about since his student had used strategies that he had never seen before and couldn't help but laugh at them. He was being pushed through strategy alone, but he wouldn't give up. They were now closing in on one another as they had their fists held out to smack the other up in the face, and as soon as their punches clashed with one another in the gym, massive shockwaves were sent around the zone. Buildings crashed down to the ground as well as massive gusts of wind was blown about the area as people's hair and clothes were fluttering wildly in the wind. With one final explosion of force, a massive cloud of dust had covered the area between hero and student. All Might knew that it wouldn't put Midoriya down since he had the defense of a dragon. A young one at that. So imagine his surprise when the smoke clears that young Midoriya is not only knocked out, but he was so injured from their clash that his left arm was broken completely and had a glaring purple color to it. All Might moved closer to his student, placed a few fingers on his neck to see if he still had a pulse, and he was relieved to know he did. Picking his student up from the ground, he left the area to get to Chiyo in order to get his student healed. It wasn't much longer than leaving the gym that Izuku returned to the land of the living as he looked at the hero holding him. I lost, huh? Izuku mumbled as the hero laughed. You did well, young man. Not anyone can keep up with me at 100%, although if I had to tell you, you forced me to use around 150% of my power just to make sure that you were knocked out. All Might said, chuckling. Izuku chuckled a little before groaning in pain as All Might and him arrived at Chiyo's office as she got to work on setting his body right. I will tell you how many times I had to deal with students who kept breaking their body parts. I better hope that you don't keep coming here anytime soon after this. Chiyo said, as she watched as Izuku gained a slightly fearful expression. Sorry, training with All Might had gotten a bit out of hand. Izuku mumbled as the woman gave him a few gummies. Take these, they will restore your stamina. Spend some time with Class 1A, they will help you regain some energy from your training. I need to talk to All Might for a moment, Chiyo said, as Izuku nodded and got up from the bed and stumbled out of there. Now that they were alone, Chiyo slammed her syringe cane over All Might's head in anger. Ow 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 ow. What was that for? All Might asked. You bull-headed numbskull, what do you mean what was that for? You nearly killed your student with an attack over 150%. If he wasn't a dragon or a young one at that, he would have been killed from the amount of force you placed on his body. He had many multiple fractures in his skull and the rest of his bones in his body. If you broke his skull at the front of his face, he would have bones poking through his brain and making him brain dead from your fight. Quote. Chiyo yelled angrily at him. I'm sorry, I just wanted to see how well he could use the power without breaking his limbs. All Might said, worried for more punishment. You will allow him to gain at least 50% of his power before doing that again. He almost died from that fight, and you will be needing to keep your power down a lot more since you ran through at least an hour's worth of your remaining time. Chiyo said, as we returned to Izuku. Izuku was walking towards the Class 1A dorms of Heights Alliance. He had been thinking about what he could have done better in the fight against his teacher. He couldn't get more thoughts into his head when he arrived and saw the class playing video games and roughhousing with one another in the main lobby. What is going on here? Izuku asked one of the girls at the table. Oh, they made a bet of who would be stronger and are fighting because one lost and the other is defending his win. Jiro said, as she smiled at Izuku. Okay, well I will be up in the dragon's nest. Izuku said, as the girl nodded her head and went back to studying for a test. Izuku walked up the stairs and made it to his dragon's nest as he called it in order to lay down and fall asleep. As he placed himself on the gathering of hay as well as wood, he never noticed how another person was in his room staring at him as he fell asleep on his bed. As soon as he was completely out from the training for the day, the person in his room moved out of hiding as they moved closer to his body as they watched him transform into his draconic state. Since it was sleeping, they moved themselves to where its paw was in order to lay down next to it. They had wanted to know about how warm Izuku's draconic form was, and as soon as they placed the giant paw over them, they felt that it was really light as well as soft. Just as they were about to fall asleep as well, Izuku pulled his draconic tail over his paw and covered the person with it, as if it was a blanket. The duo would fall asleep next to one another, Izuku unaware of the invader of his room as well as who they were. We get a closer look at who had entered his room, and they had long green hair as well as the hair was slightly curly, and they had sharp teeth as they smiled in their sleep and mumbled. I can't believe that I am sleeping with a dragon. Izuku was waking up from a dream that he was having. It was a really good one considering everything that happened in the past. Blearily he noticed that there was a small heat signature on his left paw, and as he looked at it, he found a sleeping girl with sharp teeth as well as seaweed-colored hair sleeping on his paw. As he struggled to keep his mind from straying from unforgiving thoughts, he began to slightly panic since he never had something like this happen to him before. So trying to move about his room with a sleeping girl on his hand, he went towards the kitchen in his room, trying to make sure that he can make some breakfast inside there for himself and his guest. He never really had a problem with Class 1B since they never attacked him in the first place in his original world, and he couldn't help but become flustered at the fact that the most provocative girl in his sister class had been asleep in his arms. Once he finished breakfast, he started to set up the table with one hand as the girl in his hand noticed the smell of food being placed as her mouth started watering and she moved about his hand to wake up. As soon as she looked at him from her position, she began to get a bit frightful since this was a dragon and it somehow made breakfast whilst she was sleeping in his hand. Good morning. The girl asked, as she nearly squealed in delight. Morning Tokage-san. I believe that you don't know me, but I know you from a realm that used to be where I lived. Izuku said, as the girl was revealed to be Setsuna Tokage. Well, what is your name, you big hunk of a dragon? She asked, flirtatiously. My name is Midoriya Izuku, but you can call me Izuku for the time being. I'm not really fond of my last name, not because of family issues, but because of what happened to me. Izuku said, as Tokage nodded her head. Well, if you already knew about me, I'm Setsuna Tokage, Vice Representative of Class 1B. I hope to get to know you a lot better, she said, as she sat down at the table with Izuku. Wow. So you were killed by Class 1A because in that future where you came from, they and the heroes thought that you'd become a villain at some point? Setsuna asked, as they sat in front of each other. Izuku was now in his humanoid form as his head had two horns coming from the top of his head as he nodded his head. I was so powerful already that they legitimately needed to catch me and Shigaraki off guard in order to kill us both before we could do anything to stop them. What hurts me the most was that it was Principal Nezu and Uraraka-san who came up with the idea, Izuku said, somberly as he drank some tea. Well, this version of your classmates really do care about you. Don't let them feel left out of your life since they aren't the same as the people you met. Setsuna said, as Izuku stared at her softly. I can't just get some trauma out of my head like that, it was really traumatizing for me. The people that I called friends, the only ones who were my friends ever since I was 4, had betrayed me all because they thought that I'd become a villain drunk on power when I became a pro-hero. I can't exactly fault them for that because of that one saying people used to say about heroes and villains. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. I know that they were just scared, but it really hurt me mentally because of the fact that I had been betrayed by the very first friends I had made. Only for them to regret their decision as soon as I was dying. Izuku said, as he started to tear up. He never really liked talking about how he died the first time, it was incredibly painful. More painful than being bullied by Bakugo for his entire life and being exploded every second of every day. What did you do after they landed that lowered guard attack on you and Shigaraki? Setsuna asked, worriedly. I decided that if nobody wanted to be my friend and that they only were friends in order to betray me. I might as well completely erase myself as well as Shigaraki with the only way I knew how with my quirk at the time. Izuku said, as Setsuna gained a small flash of what happened from Izuku blipping it into her brain. From what she saw in the small, minuscule amount of time needed to see, she was horrified that Izuku had to resort to literally blowing himself up with the accumulated power of his quirk, that wasn't even at full power in his fight with Shigaraki by the way. Although she kind of put the dots together when she saw an image of Izuku glowing yellow and a massive explosion emanating from him taking out one of the traitorous bastards. Yeah, I can kind of see what you did in order to do that, but why would you blow yourself up? Your quirk isn't that powerful, right? Setsuna asked, as Izuku told her about his quirk. My quirk's name isn't superpower like I told the class. My body was already that of a dragon, so introducing a multitude of quirks really fucked up my body. My quirk's true name was One for All. It was derived of a villain that had been thought dead for a few years since All Might was the one to end the man. But he failed. The man who created my quirk was originally his brother's, Yoichi Shigaraki. He faced off against his brother about a year and a half after gaining a stockpiling quirk that his brother found and stolen. Unknown to both brothers though, Yoichi Shigaraki had a quirk all his own, the ability to pass a quirk on to the next. Izuku said, as Setsuna was now completely invested in this story. From Yoichi the quirk was passed on to the second user. His name was lost to time. Then came the third, who both second and third were the ones to save Yoichi from his brother and allowed him to gather the strength to fight said man. But I digress. Once the first was killed, then All for One, the villain I was talking about, chased after the second, since he now had the quirk, but for some reason by the time All for One would find the second user, he had already passed it on as he was holding off the villain. Some time would pass and third would find another man who was not wishing to become a hero, but decided to take the power himself. His name was Hikage Shinomori. He had a quirk that was really useful to me in my old world. Izuku said, as Setsuna nodded along. Third would be later killed in battle against All for One, but fourth during that time had been training the power in order to stockpile as much power as he could before something horrifying happened to him. His body couldn't keep up with the strain the power of One for All was dishing out on his body, and it started to rapidly age him. By the time fourth was about to die, he found fifth, a young underground hero who had the ability to cover his tracks with a mere smokescreen. As soon as the quirk was given away though, All for One appeared and battled the fourth user in order to try and take back One for All. Izuku said, as Setsuna nodded her head. Unknown to the both of them, there were people standing outside his room hearing all this and were writing it down. As soon as fifth had managed to escape from the hands of All for One, he went off to train by himself and was found very quickly by All for One. He used his quirk in order to attempt to escape from the villain as much as he could, but that was when he found sixth, a man who was going by hero name Lariat. Banjo Daigoro was the sixth user of One for All, and he used his skills with his quirk Black Whip in order to make sure he escaped and went into hiding from the symbol of evil. Although, that only lasted for about a year or two before the villain finally found him, and once again, the user of One for All had managed to hand off One for All to the seventh user of One for All. All Might's original master, Nana Shimura. She was like a mother to All Might as she found him on the road as he tried to defend the people from villains and criminals as a young man. He was the most impressive thing she had found since he had been fighting without a quirk to protect the innocent, and he told her about his dream once she took him on as her charge. Izuku said, as Setsuna and those listening on the conversation. Wait, so All Might being the symbol of peace, that was his dream? Setsuna asked, as Izuku nodded. He told his master that he wanted to bring a light to the world and bring a smile with it to let the world know that he was there, and that there was nothing to fear from criminals and villains. He knew that at the time, the world needed a symbol that would cause all villains and criminals to fear the presence such a man could bring. So he worked hard to attain his goal of becoming the symbol of peace, but it wouldn't last much longer after that All for One would find them. Izuku said, looking down. He killed Shimura Nana, didn't he? Setsuna asked, as Izuku nodded. Out of all the users of the quirk I now bear, Shimura Nana was killed in the most brutal fashion. She was quite literally destroyed within a massive explosion on an island that All for One had found them doing their patrols on. At that point in time, All Might was a young and upcoming hero who was fresh out of UA and was learning the ropes from Nana. She was the longest living person who held One for All since fourth, but she wouldn't be the last. All Might would hold on to the quirk for so long that he outshined the previous holders because of the one thing that they didn't or couldn't prevent. Izuku said, as Setsuna was looking at him in anticipation. All Might before gaining the quirk One for All was quirkless. Just like me, Izuku said, as Setsuna looked at him weirdly. But that's impossible, he had a quirk since he was born. Setsuna said, as Izuku shook his head. If All Might had a quirk he was born with, the amount of power he had accumulated during his first year of being a hero would have rapidly aged him to the point that he would have died of old age before meeting All for One. Izuku said, as Setsuna stared at him in shock. How long would someone, like me, would last if I were to hold this quirk? Setsuna asked. You would probably last maybe a year, maybe 2 without your body breaking down from having not 1, but 7 different quirks that aren't yours. Izuku said, as Setsuna covered her mouth with her hand. How are you able to hold the quirk then? You had quirks stuffed into your body. Setsuna asked, as Izuku stared at her. I'm originally quirkless, and that means that they can stuff my body with as much quirks as they want. A quirkless person is actually perfect for holding multiple quirks. I should know because I was capable of using the previous wielder's quirks in my old world. Izuku said, as Setsuna looked at him funny. How were you able to do that? She called out, as Izuku flat out told her. One for all reached singularity. With me as the wielder, I was able to manifest the previous user's quirks. And it started with Black Whip during a training exercise between Class 1A and 1B as they were training, and a student named Hitoshi Shinso was within your class learning to become a hero with all of us. I was royally pissed off at Monoma as he was getting on my nerves to the point that Black Whip manifested and started raining havoc on the entire training facility. It took Shinso brainwashing me to stop all the Black Whips from hurting my classmates at the time. But that wasn't the end of it. Since we now knew that I'd be gaining the quirks of the previous users, they had trained me in order to be capable of using them all without even thinking about it. Zero helped me with Black Whip, Uraraka-san had helped me with Float as she had a gravity negation quirk. But the rest after that were appearing during a point in time where I decided to go rogue. Izuku said, as Setsuna looked at him pointedly. Are you telling me that you became a vigilante during our school year? Setsuna asked, as Izuku nodded. During that time, I had gained access to all of the previous users' quirks except for one. I had managed to defeat a villain with only 45% of my quirk mastered, and that very villain was the one who had me use 1,000,000% of One for All just to knock him out. Izuku said, as Setsuna looked at him closely as she asked him one final question. How did you defeat him the second time? I used 45% One for All and defeated him using Black Whip as well as a Detroit Smash from my mentor. It knocked him out in one blow. Izuku said, as Setsuna was beginning to cackle. What was this villain's name? Ha. Setsuna asked, as she cackled. He was the S-class villain Muscular. Izuku said, as Setsuna stopped laughing. You're telling me that you, using 45% of your full power, had managed to knock out an S-class villain with only one punch? She asked, concerned. Izuku nodded as she then began to nod her head as she understood why the old friends of Izuku were rightfully scared of him. Izuku, not to toot your own horn, but that was probably the reason they wanted to get rid of you. Setsuna said, as Izuku tilted his head in confusion. That is totally adorable, but I need to focus. You defeated a villain that would probably take a while for All Might at his full power in order to defeat, in one hit. That means that they were fearful of how much stronger you could possibly get in the future. They weren't killing you to betray you, they were trying to make sure that your power wouldn't take over your mind. That kind of power to knock out an S-class villain all on your own without even trying in the slightest, that would take All Might about an hour most. Setsuna said, as Izuku nodded. That was why they decided to wait until I had Shigaraki in cuffs. Izuku said, as Setsuna nodded. They continued to talk about quirks as well as other things as the rest of their audience had left them to their devices. Izuku had no reason to feel unsafe around Tokage. She was really nice, and even if a bit flirty, she was a nice change of pace for him. He really liked how the girl treated him, but there was only one thing on his mind at the moment as the day was about to come to an end. I should probably talk to Uraraka. A day had passed since Izuku had met the lizard girl who had snuck into his room on the top floor of Heights Alliance. He had been thinking about talking to Uraraka as she had been the one who came up with the plan to originally kill him and Shigaraki in his original timeline. So here he was struggling to come up with what to ask her as well as tell her how he felt in those moments before he saw her true feelings toward him. Shaking his head, he knocked on her dorm bedroom door as he stood there looking nervous as well as skittish towards those who looked his direction. Mostly the girls who were nearby who were watching what would become the spectacle of the day. Taking in a deep breath, he waited for Uraraka to open her bedroom door, and once that actually happened, he saw that she looked at him with curiosity as well as confusion. Midoriya-san, what is wrong? She asked, as she looked him over. I need to talk to you about something, Izuku said, as he looked into her eyes. Sure thing. Want to come in? She asked, as Izuku nodded, being led in. He didn't let the thoughts of those nearby leave his mind as he thought he heard the thoughts of Mina calling out that Ship Izuocha was now in session. As Uraraka had sat down at her table, Izuku sat down on the ground as he looked at the space as he tried to gather his thoughts about what he really wanted to inform her about. What's wrong? You don't seem to be very happy about what you're about to tell me. Uraraka said, as Izuku looked even more timid now. He didn't know why he felt this way towards his first friend from his old timeline, causing these kinds of feelings to come up now. He felt his stomach fluttering like butterflies as he took another deep breath. Uraraka-san, I need to tell you about what happened from my timeline of events that led to me coming here. Izuku said, as Uraraka moved over to her bed. As soon as she was situated, he talked about how his year at UA was in his timeline, how things appeared to be very similar to this timeline of events except for the fact that the Izuku of this world had killed himself seeking the sweet relief of happiness that death warranted to him. From that day forwards, I had decided to go out on my own and become a vigilante to try and take in All for One again. Only for it to backfire on myself twice as hard. I had managed to defeat All for One. But it cost me at least a portion of my sanity. And it wasn't much longer after that I had to fight Shigaraki Tamura. Izuku said, as he gained a pained expression as he placed a hand over his chest. What happened? Why are you holding your chest? Uraraka asked, concerned. Just a phantom pain of what happened as soon as I had managed to get Shigaraki Tamura to actually surrender. Izuku said, as he lifted his shirt to show one literal and seemingly painful scar covering the middle of his torso. Right where his heart was located. What caused that? Uraraka asked, placing a hand without a pinky finger on of his chest. I was betrayed by those I thought were my friends. Izuku said, as Uraraka gained a sad as well as pained expression. Why you were betrayed by your friends? Then that means, Uraraka got ready to state as Izuku finished for her. You were a part of those friends, you didn't do anything against me physically. But you did make the plan to take me down. Izuku said, as Uraraka couldn't understand what could make her do that. Why would that version of me do that? Uraraka cried out, as she placed a hand over her mouth. I was your first friend at UA, right? Exclamation mark. Why would I do that to you? Uraraka said, as she grabbed Izuku's shoulders. Because I was a threat to the future. Nezu had come up with a theory that at some point I might come to the conclusion that to keep the smiles of my friends. I would kill those who stood in my way. And he couldn't be even more right than he thought. Izuku said, as tears started to flow from his eyes as he remembered the world he just came from. Why you died though? How would you make Nezu's prediction come true? Uraraka asked, as Izuku looked at her. Just because he said that I would do it doesn't mean that I would do it here. I lost everything when I went to a new world, a world filled with magic, supernatural creatures, and more. Every single pantheon that you can think of for ancient history, they existed in the world I was deposited as a dragon. Izuku said, as he showed her his draconic wings. What could make you go from a normal 15-year-old boy and decide genocide as the answer? Uraraka asked, as she looked downright fearful of him. You know the saying that one will do anything for a family, no matter the cost. Izuku asked, monotonously as Uraraka noticed the pain behind his dull eyes. They had stopped crying a while back and were now dull. It was as if she was staring into the eyes of a doll that couldn't work anymore. Why yeah, but what does that have to do with anything? Uraraka asked, as Izuku looked her dead in the eyes. I made a family of my own in that world. I had a child of my own as well, and, even then fate really loved to screw me over. Izuku said, as his tears came back anew. Uraraka pulled him in for a hug now, as she felt something in her mind think about how he had needed something akin to this in the world he came from. This faction that were calling themselves heroes. They didn't like that there were supernatural sea creatures trying to take portions of the world over. So they set out to kill each and every species until all that was left was humans. Izuku said, as Uraraka pulled Izuku in further. My family was targeted, all because of the fact that I was AD Dragon, and my wife at the time was AD Devil. A-, and they had the gall to kill my daughter in front of me. Izuku said, as his words started to become nothing but incoherent sobs as he held onto Uraraka for comfort. As Uraraka had rubbed his back, she could finally see what could make the normally calm and collected boy in front of her break entirely from his heroic persona that she could tell was within him from a mere glance. "Why you killed them all, didn't you?" Uraraka asked, although it was worded more as a statement than a question. Every single one of them." Izuku stuttered as his tears came back as he remembered each and every hero's cries of agony as he took each one down in his fury. They pushed me to fall into a state of being that is very dangerous for AD Dragon," Izuku said, as Uraraka pulled him away from her chest. What happened?" she asked, not wanting to hear it but wanting the boy to get it all off his chest. I went from being a normal dragon to becoming an evil dragon. In title only," Izuku said, as he thought about all the pain he felt that day he became an evil dragon in nature alone. What is an evil dragon? Aren't they like the bad evil dragons from story tales? Uraraka asked, as Izuku shook his head. Evil dragons in the world I came from are normal dragons who had suffered the pain of loss of someone dear to them. Or they lost their moral compass, forcing them to fall into a category where they are in a morally gray area. They can still be kind creatures, but their attack potency as well as power are increased by dozens of times. For me to become an evil dragon, a lot of things happened to where I had to suffer the loss of those who I had bonded with. If someone is bonded with a dragon, they are connected to that dragon for life. Their life is extended to the lifespan of that dragon, and they become an entirely new entity, one that is half dragon and half human. Izuku said, as Uraraka nodded. But with the death of the ones who I came to love and start a family with. I lost it. Without them, I couldn't hold my anger as well as fury from their death back. I only left one survivor before taking my own life again in that world, but at the same time I had destroyed the planet itself, making sure that my only friends I had left got into the dimensional gap before I did it. Izuku said, as Uraraka looked into Izuku's eyes. They had been talking for about 2 hours now, as Izuku had now started to slow down his crying enough that he could just sit in a small corner of the room, looking like a kicked puppy. Placing her hand on Izuku's bed of hair, she rubbed his head as she used her fingers to scratch at his horns that were protruding from his head. As soon as she did that, new tears started to come from the boy as he leaned even more into her touch as she looked stunned and was stunned even more when she had heard a purr from his throat. Stopping immediately, she looked at him with confusion as well as fear that she went too far as Izuku gave her a look as if stating that he wasn't finished. Sorry, but your hair is really soft. Same for your horns, Uraraka said, as Izuku laughed a little. Don't worry, but the reason I was crying was because my old wife would do the same thing whenever I was sad. Izuku said, as he looked at the locket that Uraraka just now noticed he held onto his hand. Can I see who was in the picture? She asked, as Izuku opened it up for her to see. They look really beautiful. What are their names? Uraraka asked, as Izuku smiled at the images. The woman with black hair as well as blue eyes is named Seraphal. Seraphal Leviathan, one of the leaders of the underworld from the world I came from. The little girl next to her, the one with black hair with green roots, is my daughter, Sarah. Sarah Midoriya, Izuku said, smiling at the girl's happy expression on her face. She looks just like you, except without the big green eyes. She only has one green eye and one blue. Uraraka said, as Izuku immediately responded. A rare case of heterochromia. She was the most beautiful little girl I could ever produce. I had thought about naming her Izumi, but I let Seraphal name her. I miss them both so much. I sometimes have dreams where I never had to hear about one of them dying only to have the other die in front of myself. Izuku said, as he started to release some tears once more. Well, I think this has been a long session of talking. Want to pick this up tomorrow? Uraraka asked, as Izuku nodded. He left the locket on her desk as he needed to move on from the death of his previous family. Uraraka looked at the locket though as she made on difference from the image. That girl seems to have a different hairstyle than either of her parents, not to mention the singular blonde strand of hair. Uraraka said, as she placed the locket inside her drawer. Izuku re-entered his bedroom as he thought about the talk he had with Uraraka, and he couldn't help but smile to himself as he remembered times when Uraraka would talk to him. Their talks weren't that important, but they conveyed that he really enjoyed them whenever the girl was nearby. Thinking about what Ochako would have been like as a mother, he couldn't help but think about her in the kitchen helping him make dinner as their 3 children ran into the kitchen. Shaking his head from the vision, or hypothetical future of him and Uraraka, he focused on his next mission. Becoming the new successor of All Might and making sure to not make the same mistakes in this world that he did in his original timeline. Because he cannot afford to make the same mistakes, and this time, he will not shy away from killing an enemy who could become a bigger threat later on. Izuku was seen training in Gym Beta as he was moving around the place in his draconic form chasing Elizabeth. The girl had red lightning moving about her that Izuku recognized almost instantly since he had emerald lightning when he used one for all himself. He had helped the young girl with her explosive quirk that hurt her dramatically whenever she used it. He also found a kindred spirit in her when she told him that she was quirkless for the first 15 years of her life up until a few months ago. So with her consolidating that Izuku was quirkless in the world he had come from originally, she was happy that she wasn't alone in that aspect. And with how Izuku was training the young girl, the boy couldn't help but be happier that she wasn't making the same mistakes he did when using the power. She had only needed assistance in using the power across her body without hurting herself, and Izuku provided the kind of opponent she needed in order to master her power without hurting herself in the process. The two had clashed in the sky as Izuku had transformed into his hybrid form that allowed him to have the power of his dragon form but with his human look massively mutated. They moved across the entire gym as they appeared and disappeared with their class watching the two move from afar. Remember when Izuku said that he wouldn't be joining the sports festival a few weeks ago? Ochako asked one of their classmates as they watched the battle unfold. Yeah, I thought that he wasn't taking us seriously, but with this fight. I can certainly say that I am personally glad that he wasn't in the tournament portion of the sports festival. Momo said, as she watched both Izuku and Elizabeth clash many times creating small shockwaves with their strikes. That's just how Deku is though, looking down on others. It's what he does best after all. Bakugo growled out as he activated his quirk instinctively. Yeah, in your head. Jiro said, as the boy growled at her in response. By the time Izuku and Elizabeth had clashed one more time in the air, the young girl couldn't take the power of the boy anymore as she fell to the ground knocked out. Landing near her and picking her up in his arms, Izuku looked at his classmates, at least what they looked like once more. He was way more guarded around certain individuals as they had watched him fight, and he hadn't talked to anyone else except for Ochako since the sports festival was announced. Izuku was now seen walking through the school grounds as the young man was in search of his teacher for that day since he was far ahead of them in terms of academics. Entering the principal's office, he soon found himself staring at the principal of UA High School. Sitting down in the seat in front of him, both individuals had gone over many different things that happened in the world before getting right to his homework as well as assignments for the future. You know what happened to Ingenium, correct? Nezu questioned as Izuku nodded. Well, I want to know what you think the boy will do. Will he try and get some revenge on the hero killer for what he did? Nezu asked, as both were at this point in time playing a chess game. Yeah, it's not even a challenge about what he would do. The hero killer put his older brother, someone Iida looks up to, in the hospital. Iida will be out for blood, so whatever you do, make sure that he cannot go to Hosu. Izuku said, as Nezu stared at him. Isn't that what happened in your world though? How he learned to never let vengeance take over his mind? Nezu questioned Izuku. That is true, but I would rather him not have to deal with someone as strong as the hero killer at this point. I might not be powerful enough to save him this time around since I don't have one for all at this point in time. Izuku said, as Nezu stared at him. You know about All Might's quirk? The creature asked, as Izuku nodded. I was the original 9th user of One for All. I should know that All Might's training someone different from me, especially since if I were to take One for All right now, all the quirks inside of me would immediately kill one another until my body couldn't handle it anymore. Izuku said, as their chess match continued. Do you have any ideas about what your hero name is going to be in this world? Nezu asked, as Izuku nodded. The Emerald Dragon King, Drake. Izuku said, as Nezu nodded his head. The day continued as Izuku walked through the school learning everything he could from his teachers as well as higher-ranked students within the school itself. He knew that his internships with Nezu would have him most likely searching actively for the hero killer Stain. Especially since Nezu loves to create chaos wherever he goes, and Izuku was completely fine with it at the point in time as Nezu stared at Izuku for a moment on his cameras. He might be All Might's spiritual successor. But I need a successor of my own. I am getting old in age, so I believe having a dragon king who can reach the ages of gods will be perfect for my replacement as principal of UA. Nezu chuckled as he drank some tea. As Izuku entered the cafeteria, the young man had noticed how Setsuna and Ochako were calling him out at a table nearby. He walked over to sit with them as they talked about their days as well as what their hero names were going to be as heroes. Izuku mentioned who their interns should be so that they could get the best person for their skills with their quirks. Uraraka had gone with Gunhead again as Izuku smiled at her choice, and Setsuna gave a strong liking to Godzilla as the hero had been visiting Ua during his visit to Japan for a month or two, so he asked if Setsuna would like to learn from him and she jumped on it extremely fast. With everyone making their choices of internships, eventually who he was interning with came up as he informed them that he can't inform them about it, but he will tell them that his mentor is Nezu himself. So as they heard that, they knew that Izuku was going to definitely become something similar to the enigmatic principal of Ua. At least in personality at some point, but overall, the young man wasn't even fazed when he spoke about their school's principal. It wasn't much longer that Izuku informed them about his hero name being Dedrake, the Emerald Dragon King. They all liked the hero name, and Uraraka asked what his original one was as he informed them that he had it as Deku last time around. But it held some horrible memories from his past future. They all understood what he was meaning immediately as they all spoke about their own hero names as well as who they were planning on interning with. Izuku couldn't help but be happy with how the classmates of his were surprisingly much nicer than the original one she had. But now he had a new problem. He was reaching a plateau of power that he could use, and he knew that once he reached this plateau of power, he wouldn't be capable of increasing in more power. And he decided to keep that information to himself, since in terms of power he was already many times more powerful than most heroes as well as villains that could come up in the future. He was looking at some of the people who wanted to see his training. He found a familiar name on some papers for Elizabetta's own mentor list of her internship offers. He had seen her place it in the bin for Aizawa's class as she wanted to learn from the very same man who taught All Might himself since he had more experience. Izuku decided to ask Nezu a question about going over with Elizabetta in order to see the man once more. And Nezu was more than alright with Izuku moving over to where Gran Torino lived in order to train under the man once again as well as to assist the old hero with training the next symbol of peace. He was walking out of the office as he soon found himself staring at midnight as the woman was walking about as if nothing was wrong, and he felt his cheeks blush lightly before looking away from the woman. He was seen staring at the woman's disappearing form by some of his classmates within Aizawa's class as they seen an extremely saddened look on his face. He couldn't stand having to remember the woman who taught his class, as well as the dark fate that awaited her during a time where villains were coming to power within Japan. Shaking his head, he pulled up the number to call Gran Torino as he walked to a safe location to call the old man. As soon as the old man answered the phone call, Izuku stayed quiet for a moment before talking. "Who is this?" Gran Torino asked. No demanded. "Hey Gran Torino, I know that you don't know me, but you should know from Nezu about the fact someone came from a different world who now lives here." Izuku started as Gran Torino gave a gruff grunt of acknowledgement. "Yeah, what about it?" he asked, as Izuku gave him a small conversation about his life until he came to this world. "Damn. So everyone lost in the world you came from originally. I never would have thought that your classmates in that world would betray you like that. Kid, must have been hard to see them again for the first time, huh?" Gran asked, as Izuku hummed a little. "I know that some of them didn't want it to happen, but I don't care. I can't trust some of them anyway. I was apologized to by Kachan in my world and he was still taking the loss of my life as if it was something that I should have done when I died. In this world it seems like he feels the same way," Izuku said, as Gran Torino nodded on his end, humming in thought. "Any reason you're talking to me of all people, brat?" Gran Torino asked, as Izuku sighed. "I kind of imprinted on you in my world as some kind of old grandfather of mine. I was kind of hoping that we could have that kind of relationship here. I am supposed to be dead here in this world. And I don't want to see my mother after she had gotten over my death. Izuku said, as Gran Torino immediately caught on. You don't wish to speak to your parents, because you think that they would immediately stop what they're doing to find you. Don't you? Gran Torino asked, as Izuku hummed. Yeah, especially my mother. She would essentially prevent me from becoming a hero altogether since I had killed myself in this timeline of events. Izuku said, as Gran Torino sighed. Well, I never had the chance to have children of my own, so it would be nice to have a grandson to beat the shit out of whenever he does something wrong. Gran Torino said, as Izuku chuckled. Well, I will see you during the internships with Elizabeth. I just wish to help her train as much as she can with One for All. That way she could be at least 2 to 3 times stronger than I originally was in my world during my internships. Izuku said, as Gran asked a new question. How much of One for All could you use after my training, kid? I couldn't use even more than 10% across my body without any kind of pain flaring up. You basically managed to get me to learn how to use my quirk before we found the city of Hosu under attack by Nomu. The hero killer. Stain was going to be there with Iida not far behind, but now that Iida will be sent somewhere else. I can't help but think that he will somehow find his way over to Hosu in order to find Stain. I got to go. I need to train some more. Izuku explained before seemingly sounding like he was in a hurry. See you when internships happen next week, brat, and make sure to bring some taiyaki with you. Gran Torino said, as Izuku laughed at the old man before hanging up the phone. As Izuku looked out the window towards the dorms, he was completely unaware of a blonde-haired young man whose hair was in a cowlick who overheard his speech with Gran Torino of all people. He stared at the younger boy had walked down the hall before looking at his 2 friends who were standing there in shock as well as concern. To think he went through something so horrible in the world he came from. We need to make sure the same thing doesn't happen here, the boy said, as a periwinkle-haired girl nodded vigorously. Yeah, we will make sure that he's protected at all costs, even at the cost of our own lives. The girl smiled as an indigo-haired boy stared at both extroverted friends of his. I just want to go home, he said, hiding his face in a corner. Izuku was walking towards class as he prepared for the internships that were coming up later on that day. He was heading over to Gran Torino's place so that he could help this generation of One for All in order to gain as much control over her quirk as fast as possible. The young man wanted to be sure that Elizabeth was further on in her strength than he was, since when he found out that he could use more of his strength against Muscular in the summer camp, he had gone overboard. He wanted Elizabeth to know that she could go higher than at least 5% without having to have issues with control issues. She would only have issues with bringing out the power needed to defeat an opponent who she was being overpowered by. Not that he would let her be alone in terms of fighting Muscular himself. The man was just too dangerous for Elizabeth to take on by herself. Once class began, Aizawa started to talk about how they were all going to be heading out on their internships today, but before they did that, they would need to make their very own hero names. Izuku was already choosing his hero name when Midnight had entered the room with a smirk on her face as she looked over at the young man in his class with a mirthful look on her face. A hero isn't anything without their heroic persona. I am here to assist you all in making hero names that you all will never come to regret in the future, the woman said, as Izuku grimaced as he remembered what happened to the woman. She was not given a good death from where he came from. In fact, he could argue that it was one of the worst ones that he had seen from his time as a provisional hero in his second year. Shaking his head, he looked at how everyone was writing their hero names as he smiled at the one he had written down already. Standing up and walking up to the front of the room, he sat at the podium as Midnight smiled over at him as he twisted the whiteboard around showing his hero name. This hero name was something that an old friend of mine, in my old world, had told me would make sure that would be turned from something horrible into something great. But I wanted to change it up a little bit so that I could show others that its meaning is not that, but something more. Izuku said, as he revealed his hero's name. Deku. The heroic heavenly dragon. Once all the students had named themselves what they had wished, whilst some were still pending. Izuku and Elizabeth had walked over to the train station with their hero suits so that they could prepare themselves for their training. So what should I be looking out for when we meet Gran Torino? Elizabeth asked, as Izuku thought about it. Well, he will probably try and do a prank on you to catch you off guard. Something similar to showing you a dead body. He did the same to me in my world, but what he does in this one could be different. Izuku said, as the girl nodded. Getting on the train, Izuku kept an eye on Iida as the young man got on the train to Hosu. He had heard about his older brother being attacked by the hero killer Stain, and was starting to think that Iida was going to get himself killed. So as their train left the station, Izuku kept an eye on the young man as he talked to Elizabeth. The two were in the middle of a conversation as they saw Iida looking around as if he was searching for something or someone. But shrugging it off his nerves, they both got off the train as Izuku looked in Iida's way once more before catching up to Elizabeth. The two had soon arrived at Gran Torino's home as they looked at one another as Elizabeth had knocked on the door, only for said door to open up with a loud creaking sound as she saw a seemingly dead old man on the ground. Running over to try and do first aid on the old man, Izuku leaned on the doorframe as the girl went over the motions of first aid as he poked his head in the girl's direction with a mere statement. "I'm alive," he said, as Elizabeth stared at him for a moment before blushing. "TT, this is what you were talking about?" the girl asked Izuku, who was currently chuckling at her expense. "Yup, he did the very same thing to me in my world. At least some things just don't change," Izuku said, as Gran Torino smiled. "You're damn right, brat. Now can you tell me why you are here with the successor to All Might?" the old man asked, as Izuku stared at him. "I wanted to assist you in making sure that Elizabeth could use more of her quirk than I could by the time this internship is over. Last time I went through this training, I was only capable of using at least 15% of my quirk's power all over my body without hurting myself. It wasn't enough to protect myself from a villain who attacked my class a few weeks later," Izuku said, as Gran Torino nodded. "So how are you all going to train me?" Elizabeth asked, as Izuku and Gran Torino smiled at one another. "You are going to be in sparring matches against us both. You will be at your maximum power and we'll see if you can increase the power even higher so that your body can get used to its strain. Once you are around at least 20% of its power, you should be able to increase your strength with Midoriya when you all return from internships," Gran Torino said, as the girl nodded. "To make sure that this actually works to our benefit. I will be making a training room with the remaining magic I hold so that you can increase the amount of power you can wield that much faster," Izuku said, as a magic circle appeared in his hand. How much magical power can you use, young man?" Gran Torino asked, as Izuku sighed. "It's been lowering until I don't have any. Because of all the quirks packed into my body, it's taking more power to keep them all in control with my magic alone. It won't be long before I will not be capable of holding back my much more lewd thoughts from surfacing," Izuku said, blushing slightly whilst looking away. "All right, with that stated, let's begin the training of one Elizabeth Tatarogan, the successor to the symbol of peace," Gran Torino said, as Izuku finished the spell. Once all three of them had entered the small room, they looked about the place as Gran Torino asked Izuku a question about it. "So how much time passes when we're in here?" he asked, as Izuku thought about it. "A month. That is for the time outside of the magic spell. It would be about a few hours," Izuku said, as Gran Torino smiled. "Well, we can get a month's worth of training into the next symbol of peace, and she would be much stronger than your original self," Gran said, as Elizabeth looked at Izuku. "How much power of One for All could you use after his training?" she asked, as Izuku looked at her in the eye. "I could only use 5% of it without hurting myself safely, only 10% at the maximum since I'd be pushing myself. It took me 2 days to figure out how to spread the power in my body to every single limb of it. So with you already knowing this, we can focus more time on increasing your control of the power as well as how much time you need to activate it," Izuku said, as both him and Gran Torino had entered their combat stances. With this their training would begin, and for the next month, Elizabeth would get her ass handed to her by both mentors of hers and they would keep her fed and given enough sleep. Surprisingly, Gran Torino had noticed how much faster Izuku was when he was in the training room compared to the other two. Izuku then explained that he had trained in the place many times before coming to this world. Willingly, Izuku then informed the old man that within this place his magical presence was back to its prime, and once he showed the old man just how powerful he truly was with all his powers intact, the old man was just gaping at him. Your strength far surpasses that of all for one. So it appears that these quirks that were forced into the body your soul had inhabited had slowly taken your magical power away, thereby lowering your strength. Gran surmised as Izuku nodded. Not to mention, it has made me at least 2 to 5 times weaker than I was in a world filled with magical presences. I've hit a plateau in terms of gaining power, as you know a dragon always increases his power over time. So with me hitting a ceiling, I will be getting a new power-up soon. Izuku said, as he paused, letting Gran understand the meaning. Are you really getting weaker over time, and you just reached the limit this world will allow you to reach? Gran said, as Izuku agreed. So what is your issue with training Elizabeth yourself as well? Gran asked, as they kept an eye on the girl sleeping. I wasn't strong enough to stop Muscular in my original world because I had to nearly break my arms to the point that they had arthritis, and they were in pain constantly. Izuku said, as Gran looked at him. How far in Plus Ultra did you go? Gran questioned. I used at least 1,000,000% of One for All when I landed a knockout blow on Muscular when I first encountered the villain. It broke every single bone in my arms, and it got to the point of which my body decided to just get rid of all the broken shards of my bones in the arms. The second time I used my quirk on Muscular, I had only used 45% of its full power combined with Fa Jin and Black Whip to defeat the villain. Izuku said, as Gran looked at the young man in awe. Nowadays it would take Toshinori at least a few punches against Muscular. Probably a few hundred to knock the bastard out. You did great in your world, before you were betrayed by your friends. Gran said, as Izuku nodded. I want to make sure that she doesn't have to fight a villain like Muscular, when the time for the man to arrive will come. I will be the one to put the villain down for good. Izuku said, as Gran looked at Izuku. What do you mean by that, boy? Gran asked, as Izuku glared at the old man. Muscular only cares for wanton destruction, he kills for sport. His death may not bring those he killed back from the dead, but at least the people wouldn't have to worry about him being around anymore. Izuku said, as Gran couldn't help but agree to that. A villain like Muscular being around right now made him worry for those who couldn't wield strength similar to Elizabeth, Izuku and All Might. Even Endeavor would have trouble with a villain who could increase his own muscle fibers to fight you. It wasn't much longer before Elizabeth had woken up after her last beatdown from the last few days and got into a combat stance after eating some prepared food Izuku made on the spot. They would rinse and repeat this motion for the next week when the month inside the training room ended as the magic spell had ended. Once Gran Torino and Elizabeth had landed on the ground looking around, they found Izuku kneeling on one knee as he took in deep breaths as he looked at his arm. It was twitching as well as trembling as the pain from his arthritis had come back in full, not to mention that the amount of quirk factors inside him was starting to change his dialect to what All for One had made him to do. I need to place myself in a room without anyone inside. Don't inform me of anything, Izuku said, as he struggled to get into a room. He was holding his head the entire time as he was entering the room, as Gran Torino and Elizabeth had been looking in his direction. Is there something wrong with him? Why is he feeling this now? Elizabeth asked, as she was worried about Izuku. All for One, the villain All Might should have told you about is an increasingly dangerous villain the longer he stays alive. He can take and give quirks in order to bring those who he views as test subjects to his cause. He was one of the greatest villains around before All Might put him in the dirt, or at least we thought he did. You are going to fight someone who can use hundreds of quirks in a single second, and you will need to fight with brains as well as brawn in order to defeat him. All for One is a dangerous individual not because of his quirk alone, he is a very smart man having lived for over 200 years since the advent of quirks. From what I gathered from Toshinori and Recovery Girl, the young boy you saw holding his head in pain, he was turned into a Nomu before his soul had come into being inside the Nomu body you see. He used most of his magical power to keep his personality in the body, but it seems like it's taking its toll on him after all this time. Gran said, as Elizabeth sadly looked in Izuku's direction. What would happen if I entered his room? She asked suddenly as Gran looked at her. That young man had enough aphrodisiacs to kill a young man his age at least 340 times over. How he survived that is nothing less than a miracle with just using his magical power in order to hold it off for as long as he did. I'm surprised that he didn't release that pent-up tension in his body until now, but you probably would not wish to be a hero after he's done with you if you enter that room. Gran said, as Elizabeth looked at the old man. What time do we leave for Hosu? She asked, as the old hero looked at the time. We can leave tomorrow, that way we can head out at night. When all the villains come out, the old hero said, walking to his bedroom. Elizabeth had made her decision the moment she asked the question to the old man who watched the girl enter the room without any kind of fear. As she entered the room, she found Izuku laying on the small cot as she moved closer to the young man. Pulling out a wet rag, she pulled his body over to find it sweating profusely as she dabbled the wet rag on his forehead. Are you all right, Midoriya? She asked, looking at his shirtless body. The young man was incredibly toned for a 17-year-old from what she could see alone, but she was more worried about the pink gas coming from his skin as if they were steam. Why, you should have never come in here, Izuku said, as his body grew slightly from the release of gas. How long has this been happening every night? Elizabeth asked, as Izuku growled in slight pain as well as effort. Ever since I first arrived in the USJ, Izuku growled out. You were holding back your libido with pure endurance as well as determination. I'm not sure some others would be able to do that in your position, she said, as she continued to cool him down. J, just because I'm stronger than M most, D doesn't M mean that I am mentally strong, Izuku said, as Elizabeth looked him in the eyes. She noticed that his eyes were more slitted than before as his draconic appearance had made him look much more desirable. She had only ever seen his draconic hybrid form in training or when he felt like releasing it around the dorms, but seeing it in a private area such as a room now made him look much more adorable. With him seemingly sick to the stomach, and with how helpless he seemed in the moment she smiled at him as she continued to cool his body down. She reached for his horns as she cooled them down as well with the wet rag, unaware of the boy's growing arousal. His eyes were battling themselves for either looking at the girl's eyes or her body as his growing lust was becoming more and more apparent. Not to mention his blankets were not protecting the tent they were pitching up as slightly more gas was coming out of him now. The girl was subjecting herself to the aphrodisiacs slowly as she wanted to make sure that Izuku was alright first and foremost. You know what will happen if you don't leave this room, right? Izuku asked, as the girl looked at the now completely slitted eyes. Nodding along, she continued to help him cool his body down with the rag and cold water, but she wouldn't be needing it much longer as Izuku soon grabbed the girl and pulled her under the covers with himself. She could feel herself blushing from the contact that the young man was giving her, and she could feel the pants of breath hitting the back of her neck as she felt his throbbing member through his pants poking her rear. Staying calm and oriented, she kept herself still as she waited for Izuku to make the first move on her, and when she noticed nothing, she turned her head around to see Izuku staring at her in the eyes. He blinked slowly before she returned the favor before a glint appeared in his eyes before he moved into her face. They then were seen kissing one another on the lips as the girl was slowly turning her body around to face him fully. Climbing on top of him, both were full of lust as they looked at one another in the eyes as she stared at him before taking off her shirt and bra. Are you sure that you want this? Izuku asked, wanting confirmation. Yeah, I've been getting more and more attracted to you these last few weeks since we were training together. Now shut up and let me have this, Elizabeth said, as she kissed him once more on the lips. The next morning Gran Torino sat on the couch as he looked at the news. He knew that today would be a good day to give the two students a good experience of fighting in Shinjuku. So as he stood up to get the two out of bed, he walked over to Izuku's bedroom only to find the two already prepared and sitting on the bed. Looks like she got you back under control. What did she do? Fuck you. Gran joked as the girl blushed from being called out. Wait, you two did it. Did you at least have protection? Gran Torino scolded the two. I can control how virile my sperm are. She won't be becoming an early mother this soon into the school year, Gran Torino. The aphrodisiacs were too much for me to handle at the moment last night, Izuku said, as Gran immediately took the situation seriously. Haven't you been getting yourself pleasured correctly since the USJ event? Gran questioned seriously as Izuku shook his head. I was trying to keep that information to myself. I don't want to cause people any issues, and I couldn't exactly tell my classmates that if I let myself go under the aphrodisiacs that were still present in my body, I wouldn't be treated that well. Izuku said, as he grimaced. Well, at least you can control your body. This is what I was warning you against, Tatarogan. I warned you that this would happen if you didn't listen to me, but you are your own person so I can't judge you. Gran Torino said before getting to the thing he wanted to tell them. He informed them both about the training he had for them both today in order to get as much experience as possible to become better heroes. Elizabeth had taken the challenge he gave her and was going out of the room as Gran remained in the room with Izuku. This place smells like sex and cum. How much did you put into that young girl? Gran joked as Izuku blushed. A dragon holds a lot of it, so I guess a couple gallons. Izuku asked, as Gran deadpanned at him. They were leaving at night, as Gran told them that the real villains come out during that point of time, when the limelight heroes are going to bed. They were on the train passing by Hosu as they were preparing to go over to Shinjuku, Kamino Ward. They were passing by one of the small city's blocks of Hosu when Izuku felt the hairs on the back of his neck lift up, and almost as fast as he stood up, Gran Torino had stood up as well as the wall of the train car had been blasted open. Stay here, brat. Deku, come with me, Gran Torino said, as he kicked the Nomu out of the train car. Izuku ran after the hero before looking at Elizabeth with a concerned look before giving her permission to use her quirk. Go find Iida, he will be in this city searching for the hero killer. If he is here, then it is your mission to get the young man out of the area and away from the hero killer, understand? Izuku asked, as Elizabeth nodded. He jumped out of the train car as he followed Gran Torino down the street following the Nomu who had small wings carrying it across the area. Izuku and Gran Torino had arrived in the small area of town that was covered in fire and smoke as Izuku ran towards one of the burning buildings as he started to breathe in through his mouth, bringing the flames over to him. Once all the flames were being dealt with by Izuku, the firefighters as well as the smaller heroes were entering the building in order to find anyone still left inside. Izuku went over to each building as he took down every fire in the area so that the heroes wouldn't use their powers for that and use it to keep the civilians safe. As soon as he was about out of time to hold in the flames, he came across another Nomu who was oddly similar to the one All Might fought in the USJ as he walked closer to it. Opening his mouth to release the flames onto his opponent, Izuku watched as the Nomu placed its arms in the way of the flames in order to block the incoming wave of energy. The Nomu would hold up for a few moments before being killed through the completely terrifying flames of the young dragon. With the Nomu defeated, Izuku went to help the other heroes in the area dealing with the Nomus causing havoc in the area. He soon ran into Endeavor as he took down another buff Nomu with just his pure flames, taking out its brain as well as head. Looking over at what used to be flaming buildings, Endeavor looked at Izuku as the young man tended to the civilians in the area. Shaking his head at the boy, he moved on to the other heroes in the area, trying to gather as much information as possible. Izuku was then looking at his phone as he got a message from Elizabeth as he immediately took to the sky with Todoroki, who was in Elizabeth's class. The young man looked at Izuku with confusion as Izuku saw him look at his phone before nodding at the draconic young man. They continued to fly over the city looking for the location that was sent to their phones when they heard a fight going on in an alleyway. Dropping from the sky, Izuku had aimed himself to where he would be falling towards where the attacker would be based on his vision. As soon as the person was upon a downed figure, they raised their blade into the air as they prepared to land their attack on the downed person's back. But before the blade could make contact, Izuku pulled his arm back and punched the hero killer in the face, sending him into the wall at the end of the alleyway. Looking down at the person on the ground, Izuku saw Iida laying on the ground prone as he stared at Elizabeth in the same position. "What are your blood types?" Izuku questioned suddenly. "Mine's AB," Iida said, as Izuku nodded and looked over at Elizabeth. "Mine's type O," she said, as Izuku released a breath of relief. "Okay, you will be the first to be released from his quirk's effect. It works based on blood type so long as he licks any blood," Izuku said, as the hero killer chuckled. "You're the first hero who has known my ability from no information given to you," the hero killer said, as Izuku revealed his draconic wings, making himself appear larger than he already was. But this was a ploy in order to allow Todoroki enough time to move Native and Iida out of the alleyway and out onto the street with his ice. How are you aware of my quirk as well as its effects? Stain questioned as he stared at Izuku in confusion. I've fought you before, Stain. You won't remember it since it was in a different timeline of events. But I am here to make sure that you don't hurt anyone else, and it starts with taking those in this alleyway out of here and to safety. Izuku said, entering a battle stance. He used his magic subtly in order to pull Elizabeth over to him very slowly, and if Stain noticed it, he didn't voice it as he launched at the draconic boy. Activating his draconic scales all over his body, he created his hybrid form on his body as he clashed with the hero killer in the air, creating a small shockwave. Izuku then kicked the hero killer into the air, as he flew up behind the killer as he reoriented his body to look at Izuku and swung his blade at the boy. Izuku swung his tail around to smack into the blade, breaking it and sending the villain into the ground, hard. Izuku then landed on the ground swiftly as he placed the hero killer's hands behind his back and pulled every single weapon he had on himself and broke every single one of them. Even the hidden ones in his boots as well as belts surrounding his pants. When that was finished, Izuku looked at the seemingly defeated hero killer as the man glared at Izuku with hatred as well as fury. I cannot be done in this early. I must purge all heroes who don't behave like All Might. Stain called out, as Izuku sighed. Letting out a karate chop on the man's neck, he knocked out the villain instantly as he picked him up and placed him on his shoulder as Elizabeth had looked at him in shock and awe. How are you able to defeat him that easily? It took many pro heroes years if not longer to just find him. Iida called out, as Izuku stared at the boy. Aren't you not supposed to be in Hosu at all? I thought you were interning with Best Jeanist. Izuku questioned at the boy as said boy became quiet. I knew you would attack the hero killer, but I didn't think that you'd be so stupid to believe that you'd think you could win against a villain who has years if not more experience in the field. Izuku said, as he knocked Iida out as well. It wasn't much longer before the other heroes arrived on the scene to see Izuku holding the unconscious hero killer over his shoulder. Endeavor had pulled the hero killer from Izuku's back and placed him in the police cruiser and sent it off. They had all looked at one another before sighing in relief that the night was now over, and they could return back to their own agencies. Izuku pulled Iida as well as Elizabeth over to where they were going to find Gran Torino. Once they arrived near the old man congratulated them both for taking on the hero killer and escaping with only scratches as well as injured pride. But unknown to all of them, because of Iida's actions, internships were going to be put off until a later date. It wouldn't be until the next morning that a UA vehicle would arrive to pick up all 3 students and bring them back to UA's campus, where Iida would be scolded for abandoning his post within Best Jeanist's agency, as the man was worried about him the entire time. Elizabeth had then told Izuku that their night of passion with Gran Torino's home would be their very own secret as the young man patted her head. They would continue their day within the UA's campus as they waited for their other classmates to return from their own internships. Izuku sat in the living room within the Heights Alliance dorms as he thought about everything that had happened in the previous few days. He fought Stain, had entered a sexual relationship with All Might's new successor in terms of her quirk usage, as well as came to this world after causing the previous world's destruction in an alternate reality. He had been thinking about things over the last few days as he wanted to know about how everything within his old life's reality was going. He knew that he essentially was forced to abandon that world since he caused its destruction, but he still couldn't understand why he was brought back into a world that didn't really need his presence within it. So as he was thinking about these problems, he never really noticed how Iida was returning back to the dorms with a resigned look on his face. As the young man sat down next to Izuku, that was when Izuku noticed the young man of the Iida family who was looking distraught. Are you all right, Iida-kun? Izuku asked, as the young man thought about what happened. I was taken out of the hero course for my actions against the school rules. I will be able to return in the next sports festival, but that is only if I do well on the festival. I was coming here to say goodbye to those who arrive, Iida said, as Izuku nodded. This wasn't what happened in his world when Iida had gone to deal with Stain himself, but it was much better than what had happened in his world. The boy merely got a slap on his wrist in his world of events and was allowed to stay in the hero course, albeit with more eyes from the teachers on him. As Iida had left Izuku alone, the boy thought about everything that had happened once more, and he couldn't help but smile at the events that brought him to this point. He just wished that this world didn't turn out like the one he just came from, since he didn't want to witness those he loved dying in front of himself again. He continued to stew on his thoughts as Elizabeth had started to come up behind him with a look on her face that was looking full of mirth. It was later on in the day, when the other students of Class 1A who soon arrived in the dorms with concerned looks on their faces as well as slight anger. What happened during our internships that caused us to have our own internships to be postponed until later? Mina called out, as the girl groaned out loud. I have a feeling Izuku might know. Another boy said, as he pointed at Izuku, who had been writing things on a whiteboard. Once the boy had finished writing everything he needed to be written down, he moved away from it as they all read everything that happened on his internship with Gran Torino. And they soon realized that Iida was taken from the class for insubordination as well as abandoning his internship hero and going after the hero killer on his own. With that, the class had become much more worried since they didn't know who would be next on the chopping block as Ochako walked up to Izuku. Why did he go after the hero killer? She asked, as Izuku sighed. The hero killer placed his older brother in the hospital since they were targeted by the hero killer. So Iida thought that since the other pro-heroes had failed, that he would be able to defeat the hero killer where they weren't. Izuku said, as the entire group of girls and boys just grimaced. Let this be a lesson for you all. If you know a serial killer of both heroes and civilians have either hurt or killed a loved one for you all. Don't let yourself become filled with enough rage that you don't know right from wrong. Izuku said, as he left the group to their devices. As soon as he disappeared up the stairs of the dorms, Ochako and a few other girls decided to move up the stairs after him. With how their days were very, very tiring, they decided that they should get some rest, but as soon as they were about to fall asleep, the principal had released a message to those who were still awake. Remember, you have your final exams coming up. Be sure to study up as well as prepare for the practical portion of the final exams. With that stated, everyone started to study as hard as they could whilst Izuku could be seen sleeping in his room at the top of the building. He knew everything within the school's curricular academics as he had already learned them in the past. So all he really needed to do was train himself for what the final exams would be based on the past. He didn't want to tell the others about what it would be about since that would be getting them overprepared for them. So as he kept himself snoring softly, he did notice a distinct smell coming towards his room, and as he opened his eye, he saw the girl who had come in the last time he was alone in here. Setsuna had stared at him whilst he was in his draconic form once again with the awe of a super excited little child as she ran over to him. With that, the two had fallen asleep within the next few minutes, blissfully unaware of the fact that a few others had found Setsuna's hiding spot and joined the two sleeping students. With that, the group of students fell asleep inside Izuku's little cave of draconic smells as well as warmth. It was the next morning that Izuku woke up with a bunch of feminine smells coming over his nose as he stared at the girls sleeping underneath his tail. He smiled softly as he saw a few of them moving about in order to warm themselves up even more as he lifted his tail in order to get them to wake up. As soon as they all opened their eyes, they saw that his draconic eyes were staring at them with a mirth in his eyes as they blushed crimson. Once they all continued on with their day after the whole embarrassment, they felt that morning the classes returned back to their homeroom in order to start the studying for the final exams. Class 1A had entered the room only to find Aizawa staring at them all with his signature creepy smile as he kept an eye on all of them. With the entire class prepared for the lesson he was going to give them today, he started on the lesson and wrote things down for them to get for the final exams, stating that it would be required to know for it, and he couldn't help but smile at how his class was starting to become better at being quiet. Maybe for once I can finally get some good sleep during the interim of classes, Aizawa thought to himself. As the day continued on, the students kept themselves quiet for a majority of the day as they focused on their final exams studying. It got to the point that Aizawa had woken up on his own due to the entire quiet of the class, and he leaned upwards in order to see if his class was all right. Once he saw that they were just focusing on the final exams coming up, he knew that they would become great heroes with how much their work ethic was increasing since they first started at the school. The day for the final exams for the first years on their first semester had finally come, and the classes for 1A and 1B had been working hard in order to complete their studies. Izuku had been assisting the classes with their lessons to the best of his abilities, and he was happy with all their progress. But as Izuku walked throughout the entirety of Ua, he was approached by All Might as the older hero had seen better days. "Hello young Midoriya, I was just looking for you," All Might said, happily walking over. "What's up All Might?" Izuku asked, as the man sighed sadly. "I apologize for asking this of you, but do you think you could help us teachers in making sure that the young children are strong enough to get their own provisional licenses later on this year? This final exams will be pinning the students against their teachers in order to test their mettle against the previous generation of heroes," All Might said, as Izuku weighed his options of joining the teachers in this test. It would allow him to fight against multiple opponents like he used to in the other world he lived in before coming to his original world, with the exception of this world's version of Izuku had wanted death instead of life. The pros outweighed the cons as Izuku gave the hero a stiff nod as the hero smiled down to him. "I was glad that you would join us. You will be going up against Uraraka and my own successor of Elizabeth Tadorogan. I hope that you are prepared to see how much they have been increasing their techniques as well as power in the last few months since your arrival," All Might said, as he walked away. Izuku gave the man a flippant nod as well as a wave before moving on to the classroom he was going to be visiting. As soon as he arrived, he found the trio of students that he had wanted to have a talk to, and he couldn't wait to test his new power of a dragon against them. As soon as he knocked on the door, it was opened by a young man with blonde hair with a cowlick hairstyle. Looking down to Izuku, the upperclassmen had stared at Izuku in confusion before Izuku spoke to them. "Hey, you might not know me, but I would like to have a favor." Izuku started as all three of the students stared at him in confusion. It was later on in the day that Izuku soon found himself standing on top of a building near the other Ua teachers as they warmed up. They all were doing some sort of shadow boxing as well as stretches in order to warm their bodies up enough to take the exams as seriously as possible. Izuku felt so out of place that he looked at All Might with concern as the man stood tall in all his muscular glory. "So young Midoriya, you will be fighting Uraraka-san as well as Tadorogan-san. Is this all right with you?" Nezu questioned as Izuku nodded. The small creature nodded along before having Aizawa take himself as well as the other teachers down to meet up with Class 1A as they prepared for their own final exams. As soon as Izuku overheard that All Might was up against Todoroki Shoto as well as Bakugo Katsuki, he shook his body as he prepared for his entrance. "I am here, as the villain for this exam," All Might called out, as he landed on the ground. "Wait, who is going to be going up against Uraraka and Tadorogan then?" Denki Kaminari asked, as he looked around for another teacher. But that was when everyone in the area heard the sound of a dragon screeching out in the distance, and both girls had suddenly started to both simultaneously blush as well as tremble in fear. Screaorg. Because as soon as Izuku touched down on the ground in his draconic form, everyone was feeling all the killing intent he was releasing upon them. Even Nezu was slightly trembling in the presence of the giant dragon of a being. And as soon as Nezu stated that the two girls would be fighting Izuku, they both looked at one another with confused as well as concerned looks. "Now I know you all might be wondering, why are we allowing a dragon fight two of our students? It's because of the fact, you will never know what you are facing out on the field. So with Uraraka-san as well as Tadorogan-san fighting Midoriya-kun, we will have a full group of final exams this year for Class 1A. Nezu said, as he hysterically laughed maniacally. "If you all believe that you can defeat me, that will be a pipe dream. You will need to find a way to both get around me, as well as defeat me in the given time of the final exams. Happy hunting." As all the students looked over at Ochako as well as Tadorogan, they were expecting the two to be praying to God for some kind of miracle, but they found the girls looking at Izuku with determination. And soon enough the final exams began, with a few other teams moving in first as they looked at each and every screen, with Kirishima and Sato going first against Smentos. The two had gone for a more straightforward strategy in order to take down the hero. They kept running towards the hero using their quirks in order to attempt to overpower the concrete. It didn't work out in their favor after a small amount of time passed over. But as the next team went up, it was Aoyama and Hagakure who were up against 13, and they were doing fairly well against the rescue heroine. After a few mishaps as well as a small question from Aoyama, who had some thoughts about the girl leaving her room at night, they had successfully secured the victory against pro-heroine 13. After them was Bakugo and Todoroki, who were up against All Might, and needless to say, it was a slaughter in the form of a man made of pure muscle as well as power. The number one hero had bulldozed through each and every attack the two could land on him as if they were nothing. Although there were some close calls from Todoroki's more lethal moves getting close to All Might's injury, it was nothing he couldn't handle. And he defeated them both at the same time of breaking some bones in their body and sending them congruently to Recovery Girl for healing. Needless to say, the two didn't pass their final exams. After those two being utterly decimated, it was Mina Ishido and Denki Kaminari's turn to go up against Principal Nezu, as the principal had gotten to the morally high ground. As the two were reduced to the principal's test subjects for a new punishment of being given the Indiana Jones treatment for about an hour, it was stated that the two weren't strong or smart enough to either outsmart or overpower the principal. So with that utter failure of the two, it was now the turn of Momo Yaoyorozu and Shiro Honta as they went up against their homeroom teacher. They were able to escape from the hero multiple times, but unaware that they didn't lose his sight, but enough to use their quirks for a trap that actually had caught the man. With him stating that he hesitated in attacking because of the versatility of Momo's quirk blocking his ability to take one of them down without her coming in to take a cheap shot at him. With that win under their belt, it was Shoji as well as Masharao Ojiro taking on Pro Hero Snipe. They had been caught by the hero within the time frame but had managed to take enough damage in order to take him down, earning them a victory. With their battle completed, it was then the turn of Koji Kota and Jiro Kyoka as they went up against Pro Hero Present Mike. The two were having issues with the hero's ability to scream really loudly, and it was getting on the two's nerves as Kyoka asked if Kota could call any insects. Needless to say, they were both able to hear the shriek of a supremely scared hero running towards them with fear in his eyes as a massive horde of ants, as well as spiders, came crawling after the hero. With the two's victory over him, it was now Tokiyami and Tsuyu's turn against Pro Hero Ectoplasm, as they were against a seemingly endless horde of pro heroes who bore resemblance to their teacher. And it wasn't without Sue's ability to camouflage herself that they managed to defeat the real Ectoplasm, who was standing back and watching from afar, creating any new clones in order to replace the ones he lost. He was taken off guard as the man was tackled and cuffed to a pipe nearby, earning the win for the two. Now it was up to Elizabeth and Ochako, who were entering the ring as they were attempting to come up with plans in order to take down Izuku. So what do you think the plan will be for taking on a literal dragon? Ochako asked, as Todoroki looked at her notebook about Izuku. She had taken notes about his draconic appearance before, since she has a love for anything supernatural. So imagine her surprise that whenever she saw the chest of Izuku's draconic form, not having the typical weakness of a normal dragon, having some less scales over his chest. We will need to wear him down in terms of stamina. He may have years of experience in fighting opponents compared to us, but that doesn't mean that he can take on someone who can consistently throw buildings at him. Elizabeth had stated before they heard the sounds of screaming on the other side of the city. That must be what he's doing as a warning of him coming for us. Ochako called out, as the two moved out of the way as a massive blast of green energy blasted through some buildings, leaving them melted. Ochako and Elizabeth had looked at the scene before them with such fear that when they looked back, Izuku's draconic form had changed drastically. Ah, it feels so good to release such tension in my back as well as mouth. I think I might be capable of breathing even more plasma beams if I work it in. Fuck, both girls stated as another beam of green plasma energy blasted towards them. Todoroki was able to move them out of the blast zone as Ochako grabbed a literal building as she threw it as hard as she could towards Izuku. As the large dragon stared at the building comically coming towards him, he just stood there with a blank look on his face as he stared at the two. Did you seriously just throw an apartment at me? Izuku asked, completely concerned as well as confused. What do you expect from us to do against you? Your anatomy is completely different from any other dragon specimens that were found in the last 100 years. Todoroki called out, as Izuku sheepishly looked away. As it turned out that this was their plan, get Izuku to become sheepish before attacking him, as they constantly threw apartment complex as well as random cars on the road at him. He blocked each strike against him with his wings as the buildings and cars simply bounced off of his body or broke on impact. He felt slight pain in his wings, but they were fine overall as he took to the skies in order to land near the two. Once he found them, he landed on all fours as the two stared at him with both fear as well as concern as he growled at them both from above. His scales had become black in color with some green veins moving about his body as if to show he was powering up. Once his body started to glow, Todoroki and Ochako had tried to use the power-up in order to run away only to be pulled in by an unknown force. Turning around, Ochako released her hold on Todoroki as she flipped through the air and flew towards Izuku. Once she saw his new form, she blushed crimson because he had horns coming out the top of his head, wings sprouting from his back as well as portions of his body had fire coming from them. Mostly around his arms, legs, groin, as well as face forming flaming parts of his body similar to Endeavor's flaming beard. As soon as Ochako was upon Izuku, she put her plan into place as she pulled out the cuffs before she swung them out to catch him unawares. But Izuku caught on instantly before catching them and placing them on the girl before pinning her to the ground. Ochako could feel the breath of Izuku on the back of her neck as she heard him pant slightly before feeling him rub himself on her slightly. "There, that should make you unable to counter what I'm about to do," Izuku said, ominously as Ochako looked back to see Izuku standing over her body charging an attack to knock her out. But just in time, he was kicked in the face as soon as the plasma beam was fully charged in his left hand. As he skidded across the ground, Todoroki had picked up Ochako, freed her from the cuffs, before looking back at a snarling Izuku. Shaking his head, he simply started to walk near the two, which they could feel the air becoming more and more heated. Soon though, nothing happened between the two as Todoroki and Izuku clashed in the middle of the destroyed city. The two seemed to be on par with one another as Ochako took this moment to leave and escape to the other end of the city which she could see the exit. With Izuku distracted, if he tried to follow her, Todoroki would follow him and keep in contact in order to distract him from Ochako. The young woman had gotten very close to the exit when she felt an invisible force snaking up her back as well as over her mouth as she looked back to see Izuku holding Todoroki in his hand, unconscious. "It took me a while to knock her out. Turns out that after training her with Gran Torino her pain tolerance had increased to drastic levels." Izuku chuckled as he stalked over to Ochako. He wasn't going easy on her since her quirk could have so many uses against him, and if she found a way to defeat him, that would be her passing grade. And Todoroki had already passed her portion of the test by holding out long enough for Ochako to escape. Too bad he had a way to knock out those with high pain tolerance. He should know, he was one of the few who he could figure out to knock out with pure power alone. As he stood before Ochako, guard completely lowered, he picked her up by the face before bringing her into his face as he let out his snake-like tongue. Licking her cheek with the kind of intimidation of an actual villain, Izuku watched as Ochako gained a slightly fearful look on her face before remembering something. And as soon as she remembered whatever was on her mind, she flung the cuffs over his neck as she stared into his face. As she panted from the amount of strength she used against Izuku, she watched as his face became softer as he looked into her chocolate-brown eyes. She looked back into his emerald-slitted eyes before they leaned closer and having a kiss in the middle of the test. As soon as the buzzer went out, Izuku and Ochako immediately remembered where they were as Todoroki woke up. "What happened?" she asked, as Ochako looked at Izuku's massively growing blush. "I would say that we both passed our test," Ochako said, as Izuku groaned softly. "This calls for a celebration in Izuku's room," Todoroki called out, as the girls giggled as they left. As soon as the two were out of the area, All Might landed next to him with a concerned look on his face as he asked his own question. "Did you really forget about the cuffs they had?" he asked, as Izuku looked at him. "No, but that was the best fight I'd ever had after you fought me. But I will be having a new fight sooner this week against a certain trio," Izuku said, as All Might looked at him concerned. "Please don't scare the big three," All Might pleaded as Izuku chuckled. "No promises," Izuku said, his voice becoming more draconic. The week following the final exams of Class 1A had been completely boring for Izuku Midoriya. The young man had been waiting for the big three of UA in order to attack him whilst he was unaware. He kept a very close eye on the trio as they were watching him from afar. He knew that they got permission from Nezu in order to accept his request of fighting him. They already knew that he came from a weird future where he was killed by his own class during a giant war between the heroes and villains as a whole. Not to mention that he was involved in other fights on another dimension where he grew in strength to the point of which he destroyed the planet there before being transported to this world universe. And as he was not even aware of them watching him from afar physically, through his senses as a dragon he could smell where they were and kept a very good eye on them through his sense of smell. He was walking towards the school today as he was preparing to assist the second class within the hero course prepare for the summer training camp. The class itself was named Class 1B, the sister class of 1A, and from what he had heard from All Might, the sister class to 1A was very competitive towards 1A as a whole to prove that they weren't weak compared to them. As Izuku stretched his body as he walked through the small campus, he smelled something coming from the ground as he looked downward to find the cowlick blonde boy coming upward with a smile on his face. The action was so out of place for Izuku that he had nearly forgotten what Mirio Tagata's quirk, permeation, did for the young man as he barely moved out of the way as the boy shouted out his catchphrase. "Power!" he called out, leaping into the sky. Izuku stared at the boy with a smile on his face as he let out his draconic wings and floated into the sky to look at his opponent. "Where are the rest of the big three?" Izuku asked. As his draconic features had become more present the higher he got to Mirio. "They are watching from afar. This is a small spar between me and you. Just to test out the waters if we need to really team up against you," Mirio said, with his trademark smile on his face. Smiling back at the young man, Izuku got into a fighting stance as Mirio did the same as they both fell back to the earth. On the ground both Nejire and Tamaki were watching with rapt attention as they thought about the fight that was about to happen. "Here we go. I can't wait to ask him about his power," Nejire called out, with a smile on her face watching the event begin. I just want to go home," Tamaki said, as he shivered in Izuku's presence. Izuku and Mirio had launched their own attacks at the other, with Mirio's punch landing on Izuku's face and Izuku's own attack phasing through the young man's body. They both continued to move about the landscape as they worked on whittling down the other's massive defense as well as stamina. Izuku sent a flurry of attacks at Mirio, starting with a left-hand sucker punch, then feinting a right hook and sending a kick from below, before going for a sledgehammer strike from above. All of which the boy had activated his quirk in order to dodge as fast as possible, and sent his own attacks at Izuku so that he could get some damage in. Izuku caused a crater when he landed on the ground as he moved forward with as much speed as possible in order to land a set of consecutive strikes on the phasing hero in training. Moving faster than some hero students could see, the duo was appearing in different portions of the field as they eventually held the other's hands as they growled at one another. From the other students who were watching the battle take place, they envisioned the two having an aura surrounding the other as they stood above the ground, causing it to crack and give way. Izuku pulled his head back before slamming it towards Mirio's face, causing the boy to immediately take in a deep breath and make sure that his head couldn't be hit. But that was what Izuku wanted. He then kneed the young man in the gut, causing him to let out his breath and stumble backwards. Taking the advantage, Izuku pressed it and sent a flurry of punches at the young man, landing multiple times in the young man's raised guard before he fell through the ground like a Looney Tunes character. With the other two members of the Big Three, they were becoming more and more increasingly concerned with how Mirio was being slowly overwhelmed by Izuku. They watched as the young man started to appear out of the ground at random points of intervals before Izuku would send a strike at the boy, forcing him to fall underneath the ground and come up somewhere else. "He's predicting W where he's C coming from," Tamaki said, as he stared in slight fear. "Wow, that's never happened before. Someone is pushing Mirio back. I can't wait to see what else he can do against all three of us," Nejire said, as she continued to cheer for Mirio. "I just hope that Izuku doesn't hurt Mirio too badly," Tamaki thought to himself, looking worriedly at Mirio. Izuku growled as Mirio had disappeared into the ground once again as he started to get annoyed with how he kept going underground. So he decided to use a new trick to get the young man out of the ground and keep him outside of it without even having to fear the young man going back underground. Placing his hand on the ground, Izuku started to increase the temperature of the ground from the inside out as he kept going until he could cause massive destruction on a massive scale. But as soon as the thing he searched for was moving about, he moved over to the spot where the young man was hiding and increased the temperature in that spot once more. This forced the member of the Big Three out of the ground, and as he flew out of the ground to take a large breath of air, Izuku launched at the young man. Grabbing him on both sides of his body, Izuku had started to squeeze his body tight to his own. Despite the height difference, As soon as he felt as though Mirio had been defeated through the power hug, Izuku dropped the young man to the ground as he struggled to get some more breath inside himself. Damn, that was really tough. Haven't had a fight like that in a while. Mirio said, as he struggled to stand up. You're the perfect opponent for me to increase my own reaction times, since you can disappear from sight at the drop of a hat. Izuku said, holding a hand out to the young man. Don't worry, Nejire and Tamaki will be here when we fight again. Want to do this again later on today? Mirio asked, as Izuku nodded. I can't wait for the challenge, but I have some final exams to get to. Izuku said, as Mirio let him go. With the young man disappearing in the distance towards UA's entrance of the main school building, Mirio and his friends had stood next to one another. Wow, he was so strong. He actually beat you, Mirio. Nejire called out, as she jumped around happily. Yeah, he was really hard to pin down and damage. I think he has some kind of damage reduction quirk or something, but if what Nezu said to us was really true. Quote, Mirio said, before remembering what the principal told them. We might actually have to team up in order to deal any kind of damage to him. I might need Nejire's quirk in order to deal just enough damage in order to scratch him, or it could injure him greatly. Tamaki said, as Mirio smiled at the young man. We will need all of our greatest skills in order to take this opponent down. Nezu stated that in another world he was granted the rank of Heavenly Dragon, meaning he was one of the most powerful beings in the world he came from. So we need to make sure that we give him a fight that is worthy of his title of Heavenly Dragon. Mirio said, as the group gave a fist bump to Mirio. Izuku was gathering some supplies to make dinner later that night as he was leaving the store down the road from UA. He had stretched a bit from the battles against Class 1B and he was very disappointed with how they projected their power and strength. Most of them passed, with the exception of the young man who kept blubbering about how his class was better than 1A even though Class 1A had every single member of their class pass except for Bakugo. So now he was seen moving towards Heights Alliance as he felt a shift in the air as he dodged to the right, just barely moving out of the way of a blast of photon energy. Looking to the sky he found Nejire-chan in her hero costume as she smiled at him from the sky. Izuku looked around the area in order to see if there was anyone else in the area but found nothing but Lemillion and Sunniator standing before him with Nejire staring at him as well. We are going to use everything we have in our arsenal in order to defeat you, Midoriya Izuku. My name is Lemillion, Mirio called out, moving into a stance. I am Sunniator, I will find a way to defeat you and be able to head home. Tamaki called out, albeit very fearfully. I am Nejire-chan. And after this fight do you want to go out on a date? Nejire said, causing Izuku to sputter out in confusion as well as blushing madly. Apparently, that was all they needed to attack as they rushed him immediately and with Nejire blasting photon beams at Izuku, the boy dodged each beam before dodging a wrapping of octopus tendrils. As he kept himself dodging each strike, he soon found his back being pounced by Mirio as the young man had landed on his back and released a flurry of kicks as well as punches to his back. Bringing out his wings, Izuku sent Mirio flying over to a small stadium nearby as he crashed through the walls. Never mind, he phased through them. Focusing on the other two, he launched towards Nejire, believing her to be the bigger threat at the moment as he failed to notice Sunniator eating a small lock of Nejire's hair. As Izuku chased the young woman through the air, he managed to catch up to her, grabbing her by her arms with one hand and let his tail wrap around her legs, holding her in front of himself. Slowly moving towards the ground, Izuku moved his face closer to the young heroine in training as he glared into her eyes before asking a question. Did you actually mean what you said earlier before the fight began? Izuku asked, as the girl looked confused before nodding. Okay, well I guess we can have that date tomorrow, around 9 p.m. Oh wait. Tomorrow is when both classes leave for their summer training camp. How about when we return from summer camp? Izuku said, as he finally landed on the ground. Sure thing. By the way, could you please move our tail away from my ass? She asked, as Izuku sputtered and let her go. Knowing that she was out of the fight, she moved over to the right as she saw Tomoko taking aim at Izuku now that the boy was completely unaware of his positioning. Plasma cannon. A very timid and determined voice called behind Izuku. And as the young dragon had turned around to look behind himself, he saw a massive beam of energy moving towards him at a fast pace. Transforming into his draconic state, fearing that his human form wouldn't be capable of taking the power of the attack with his guard lowered just enough to deal a fatal blow to him, he took in a deep breath. Explosive photon. Izuku's draconic voice drawled out, as a massive beam of exploding photons had blasted towards the plasma cannon. As the two beams of plasma and photons had clashed in the middle, a beam struggle caused by the two began as Izuku barely pushed any power into it as he watched what Tamaki would do. The young man pushed as hard as he could on the beam of energy, but he was running out of steam soon, and Izuku would make sure that the young man would survive. And as soon as the young man's quirk started to fail, he stopped using his quirk altogether in order to prevent quirk overuse. But this caused Izuku's own beam of energy to blast towards him without any kind of thing to get in its way, and as soon as the beam closed in on Tamaki, he prepared for the worst when he heard a flapping of wings in front of himself. Opening his eyes to see what happened, he found Izuku moving in slow motion and kicking his own photon blast away from Tamaki as both he, Nejire and Mirio had watched the blast enter through orbit and exit the planet and go throughout space. Tamaki had stood there with a fearful look on his face as he stared at the display in awe. Looking at Izuku, he soon found the young man to be looking at him with concern. "Are you all right? I didn't hurt you any, did I?" Izuku fretted over the older man. I'm fine. How did you kick your own attack away?" Tamaki questioned as Izuku leaned in. "It's a trade secret," Izuku said, giggling before walking away. "If you all want to actually defeat me, you will need at least a few hundred years before doing so. I have defeated many more experienced fighters in my youth as a Dragon King than I had as a hero student. You will need to defeat multiple opponents on par with all for one in order to defeat me even once." Izuku called out. As he left the two, as Mirio had appeared next to Izuku with a punch raring to go before he was slammed into the concrete path. "Ho! Stop yelling that. You give yourself away," Izuku yelled at an unconscious Mirio as he had swirls in his eyes comically. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and make sure to like and please hype this video. Now we will see you in the next video.